Imagine you're at the top of the world, on the edge of innovation, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But what if someone smarter than you, someone who can think faster, solve problems in ways you never even considered, walked into your office and challenged you? What if that someone could change everything? What if that someone had an IQ of 263? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk was used to challenges. After all, launching reusable rockets and building a company that could colonize Mars was no small feat, but this was different. This wasn't just about innovation. This was about raw, untapped genius that no one had seen in the modern world. A genius that, on paper, could outsmart him, could outthink him. Today was the day he would meet Nathan Parker. It was a crisp Thursday morning at the SpaceX headquarters, and the usual hum of high-tech machinery mixed with the soft whirring of computers processing data. Musk stood in front of a large screen in one of the conference rooms, staring at the numbers that scrolled relentlessly across it. His mind wasn't on the mission to Mars or the upcoming launch of Starship. Today, all he could think about was the meeting that was about to change everything. The news had spread like wildfire over the past week. A young genius, no more than 24 years old, had come out of nowhere with theories that some of the world's top scientists could barely begin to comprehend. His IQ? An astounding 263. Almost unheard of. Elon had never met anyone quite like him, and the media had already begun dubbing Nathan Parker the next Einstein. When Musk's assistant had first handed him the files on Nathan, he'd almost laughed. A person with an IQ of 263? That was beyond the realm of possibility. But the more he read, the more intrigued he became. This wasn't just some prodigy. Nathan was solving problems in theoretical physics and quantum mechanics that most physicists were still debating. His thoughts on space travel, energy, and artificial intelligence were revolutionary. If what he said was true, it could change the way Musk envisioned the future. But there was something else in those files, something that Elon couldn't shake off. Nathan wasn't interested in taking credit for his ideas. He didn't want fame. He didn't want fortune. He just wanted to solve problems, which, for someone like Elon, was either the most inspiring thing or the most dangerous. The door to the conference room opened, and in walked Nathan Parker, the enigma everyone had been whispering about for days. He didn't look like someone who could rewrite the future of humanity. Tall, with messy brown hair and a hoodie, he walked in as if he was just another person. Nothing special about him at all, aside from the brilliance in his eyes that seemed to pierce through the surface of things. Musk stood up, a mix of curiosity and caution in his expression. "Nathan, good to meet you," he said, extending his hand. Nathan shook his hand, his grip firm, but his gaze never left Elon's eyes. It was clear he wasn't intimidated, not by the moment or by the man in front of him who had built rockets that could reach Mars. In fact, he seemed indifferent. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Musk," Nathan said calmly. "I've been following your work for years. I'm actually a big fan." Elon raised an eyebrow. "A fan? Of what, exactly?" Nathan smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a sycophant. It was a smile that conveyed respect, tempered with an almost clinical detachment. "Of your thinking. You've challenged the status quo in ways that no one else has. But I think I can help you go even further." Elon leaned back in his chair, studying Nathan. He had heard about Nathan's confidence, but seeing it up close was something else. It wasn't arrogance. It was the kind of self-assurance that only comes from knowing you're capable of things that others can't even begin to fathom. "So," Musk said, folding his arms, "you think you can help me push the boundaries of space travel and artificial intelligence?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "I think I can help you do something that will make Mars seem like a stepping stone." His voice was calm, almost too calm, as though he was stating a simple fact rather than making an audacious claim. Elon's eyes narrowed. This was either going to be incredibly interesting or a complete waste of time. Nathan pulled out a sleek tablet from his backpack, swiping across the screen until it displayed a diagram. Elon's eyebrows shot up as he saw what was on the screen, a detailed blueprint of a propulsion system that seemed wrong. Or, rather, it was so far beyond current technology that it didn't make sense. This, Nathan said, tapping the screen, is a propulsion system that could make interstellar travel possible. With the right modifications, it could take us to the stars faster than anything we've ever conceived. Elon couldn't help but chuckle. You think you can just design a warp-speed engine in a week? Nathan met his gaze, unfazed. I can show you how it's done, step by step. The physics are already there. It's just a matter of applying the right principles. Elon blinked, then leaned forward. All right, show me. The next hour was a whirlwind of equations, drawings, and discussions that Elon barely kept up with. It wasn't because he didn't understand the concepts. It was because the concepts Nathan was presenting were so far ahead of anything Elon had ever heard of. Nathan was talking about theories that would take decades for physicists to verify. Yet here he was, speaking with the same confidence one might use to discuss the weather. Finally, Nathan paused, looking Elon in the eyes. You'll need a new kind of fuel for this to work. Something not yet discovered, but the calculations are solid. Elon was speechless. The math checked out, every equation, every figure, every probability. And yet, it was impossible. It had to be. Are you telling me that this could work? Elon asked, his voice a mixture of awe and skepticism. Nathan smiled again, this time with a hint of something more. No, Mr. Musk. I'm telling you it will work. If you're willing to take the leap. Elon sat back in his chair, his mind racing. His first instinct was to dismiss Nathan's proposal, to tell him that it was all theoretical, impractical, and ultimately impossible. But something about Nathan's calm certainty, his unshakable confidence, made Elon question everything. He had always prided himself on thinking bigger than everyone else. But was Nathan thinking too big? There was only one way to find out. All right, Musk said, standing up. Let's test your theories. Show me what you've got. Nathan's eyes lit up. I thought you'd never ask. As they walked toward the next meeting, the room filled with murmurs from Elon's team. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that this was the beginning of something big, something that could change everything. And no one, least of all Musk, had any idea what kind of journey they were about to embark on. Nathan Parker wasn't born into a world of privilege. He didn't grow up in Silicon Valley or attend fancy tech schools. In fact, Nathan's childhood was nothing like what people would expect from someone with an IQ of 263. He was raised in a small town in Oregon, where the idea of changing the world seemed more like a distant fantasy than a reality. His parents were teachers, good people, grounded in the world of books, knowledge, and education. But neither of them could have predicted the kind of brilliance their son would one day unleash. By the time Nathan was 6, he was solving problems that made even the most seasoned mathematicians scratch their heads. When other kids were playing games, Nathan was diving into books on quantum physics, string theory, and general relativity. His obsession with the universe started early, and by the time he turned 12, he had already published his first paper on the possibility of faster-than-light travel. It was something no one had seen before, a deep, conceptual understanding of the laws of nature that most adults could barely comprehend. But Nathan's genius wasn't just academic. There was something about the way he thought that was different. While most people saw problems as obstacles, Nathan saw them as puzzles waiting to be solved. It was this mindset, his ability to look at a situation and think 5, 10, even 100 steps ahead, that set him apart. As he grew older, his reputation spread, but Nathan wasn't interested in fame. He didn't chase accolades or seek recognition. He wasn't the type to appear on talk shows or flaunt his intelligence. In fact, Nathan had intentionally stayed out of the limelight, preferring to work alone, in the shadows, away from the attention that came with his brilliance. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate being recognized. It was just that the real reward for him was solving problems, pushing the limits of human knowledge. And now, here he was. At 24, Nathan had caught the attention of the world's most innovative minds, including one Elon Musk. But while Musk was driven by ambition and a desire to change the world, Nathan's motives were far more subtle. He didn't just want to revolutionize space travel or energy production. He wanted to unlock the secrets of the universe itself. If he could help Musk reach Mars and beyond, that would be enough. But in his mind, the real challenge was figuring out how to bend the very fabric of reality to humanity's will. When Nathan walked into the SpaceX headquarters, he wasn't impressed by the sleek architecture or the cutting-edge technology. He had seen far more impressive labs and research centers in his travels. But there was something about this place, the energy, the ambition, that caught his attention. Elon Musk's name was synonymous with innovation, with pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. And for someone like Nathan, who had always been a step ahead, meeting Musk was a challenge. Not just to Musk, but to himself. Could he show this titan of industry that there were limits beyond which even his incredible vision couldn't go? Nathan's hoodie was casual, and his demeanor was almost unnerving in its calmness. While most people would have been nervous walking into the lion's den, Nathan was as relaxed as if he were sitting in his living room. His brown hair was a little tousled, and his eyes, clear, intelligent, and surprisingly warm, gave off an impression of someone who was more focused on the ideas in his head than anything happening around him. As Nathan walked through the hallways of SpaceX, Elon's team of engineers, scientists, and technicians turned their heads. Whispers spread quickly. That's him. That's the guy with the IQ of 263. Some were skeptical. How could anyone be that smart? Others were intrigued, eager to see if the rumors about Nathan's brilliance were true. When Nathan finally entered the conference room, Elon was already there, standing by the large display screen, as if waiting for a challenge. Nathan walked in and offered a simple handshake, his eyes not once leaving Musk's. It was a quiet moment, but it was loaded with unspoken tension. Nathan wasn't here for pleasantries. He wasn't here to flatter Musk. He was here to prove something. "Mr. Musk," Nathan said with an easy smile. "It's a pleasure." Elon raised an eyebrow, eyeing the young man in front of him. "The pleasure's mine, Nathan. I've read about you. Can't say I expected you to be so casual." Nathan chuckled softly, not taking offense. "I'm more focused on what we can do than on appearances." Elon, for all his confidence and bravado, was taken aback by Nathan's complete lack of awe. Most people who met Elon Musk, even the most powerful or accomplished, were starstruck to some degree. But Nathan wasn't. That was something new. "You're not here to waste time with small talk, are you?" Musk said, leaning back in his chair. Nathan shook his head. "I'm here to solve problems. Big ones. The ones that most people can't even begin to grasp." Elon studied him carefully. This kid, no, this genius, wasn't boasting. There was no arrogance in his voice. It was simply a statement of fact. Nathan wasn't concerned with the things that preoccupied most people's minds: popularity, recognition, status. He was only interested in the work. And that was what intrigued Elon most. "So," Elon said, folding his arms, "what's your big idea?" Nathan's expression didn't change. "I think the key to unlocking the next phase of space travel lies not in the propulsion system itself, but in the way we manipulate energy and matter at a quantum level. We can't just build better rockets. We need to rethink the very laws of physics that govern them." Elon was silent for a moment. It wasn't what he'd expected to hear. Most of his team had been focused on incremental improvements to existing technology, faster engines, more efficient fuels, better materials. But Nathan was suggesting something different, something far more ambitious. "Rethink the laws of physics?" Musk echoed, leaning forward. "You're saying that we could bend reality itself?" Nathan didn't flinch. "I'm saying that the boundaries we've placed on what's possible are arbitrary. There's a whole realm of potential that we've yet to tap into. The question is, are you ready to go there?" Elon's heart raced. The possibilities were dizzying. The implications of what Nathan was suggesting could change everything. But was it real? Or was this just another theoretical fantasy that would never see the light of day? For a moment, Elon just stared at Nathan, trying to get a read on him. This wasn't the typical prodigy he had encountered in the past. Nathan didn't have the usual insecurities that came with genius. There was no look-at-me energy. There was just an unwavering focus on solving the problem at hand. "You've got my attention," Musk said finally. "Show me what you've got." Nathan smiled, but it wasn't with the eagerness of someone about to prove themselves. It was the smile of someone who already knew the answer, someone who was confident that the world would soon be forced to accept what he had known all along. "Let's get started," Nathan said. What followed was a whirlwind of equations, diagrams, and discussions about quantum mechanics, relativity, and the very fabric of space-time itself. Nathan's mind moved at a pace that left Musk scrambling to keep up, but there was something exhilarating about it. Nathan didn't just throw out wild theories. He backed them up with cold, hard logic. Over the next few hours, the conversation spiraled from the possibilities of faster-than-light travel to energy generation at a scale that Musk had never considered. Nathan wasn't just suggesting improvements. He was offering solutions to some of the most profound challenges humanity would face in the next century. As they dove deeper into the conversation, Elon felt something he hadn't in a long time, a sense of wonder. He was used to solving problems, to thinking on the cutting edge. But Nathan was taking him to a place he hadn't even dreamed of. And as the meeting ended, Elon realized one thing for certain. This wasn't going to be a simple partnership. This was going to be a journey into the unknown. The days following Nathan Parker's meeting with Elon Musk felt like the calm before a storm. It was as if the universe itself had been holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold next. SpaceX's headquarters buzzed with energy as the engineers and scientists scrambled to process the ideas Nathan had presented. No one could deny the sheer brilliance of his concepts. His theories seemed like the next step in human evolution, pushing the boundaries of science and technology in ways that no one else had ever dared. But something was off. While Elon was clearly intrigued by Nathan's proposals, a nagging sense of unease had begun to creep into his mind. There were too many unanswered questions, too many risks. The stakes were astronomical, literally. If Nathan's ideas were wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic. But if they were right, they could change the very fabric of space exploration itself. Elon wasn't used to uncertainty. He was used to taking big risks, yes, but risks he understood. Space travel, electric cars, artificial intelligence. He'd built companies on the back of bold ideas, but he had always grounded those ideas in some form of reality, some understanding of the mechanics behind them. Nathan, on the other hand, was playing in a different league. He wasn't just pushing boundaries. He was suggesting new ones that didn't even exist yet. It was thrilling, but terrifying. As the days wore on, Elon and Nathan's interactions grew more intense. At first, Elon had been excited to work with Nathan, eager to see how this young genius could help him unlock the secrets of the universe. But now, that excitement was tempered by doubt. Every conversation with Nathan seemed to raise more questions than answers. For every breakthrough idea Nathan presented, Elon found himself asking, is this really possible? The theories were solid, but they were based on concepts that had never been tested. Nathan's proposals were built on a foundation of abstract ideas, theories that existed mostly in the realm of mathematical equations and hypothetical constructs. And it wasn't just the scientific uncertainty that bothered Elon. It was Nathan's singular focus on the work. It was as if the young genius had no regard for the broader consequences of his ideas, no real understanding of the impact they could have on society or on SpaceX itself. Nathan didn't care about the publicity or the fame. He was completely uninterested in anything but the pursuit of knowledge. It was something Elon both admired and feared. Elon knew he had to make a decision. Was he going to continue down this path with Nathan, risking everything for the potential of something that could be truly revolutionary? Or was it time to pull the plug before they ventured too far into uncharted territory? It all came to a head one late evening when Elon and Nathan were alone in one of SpaceX's high-tech laboratories. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the flickering holographic displays showing complex equations and simulations. Nathan was hunched over a terminal, his fingers flying across the keys as he input data into the system. Elon stood across the room, arms crossed, watching intently. "Do you really think this is going to work?" Elon asked, his voice quiet but laced with skepticism. Nathan didn't look up from the screen. "It's not about whether it's going to work. It's about whether we're willing to push past the boundaries of what we know. If we let fear control us, then we'll never make progress." Elon felt a twinge of irritation. "I'm not afraid, Nathan. I'm cautious. There's a difference." Nathan finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Caution will get you nowhere, Elon. You've built rockets, you've revolutionized electric cars. But that's small compared to what's possible. You're holding back." Elon's pulse quickened. I'm holding back? You're talking about altering the very fabric of reality. Do you have any idea how many things could go wrong? How many lives are at stake? We're talking about space travel on a scale no one has ever dreamed of. This isn't a video game. It's not some lab experiment. People's lives are involved. Nathan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. That's what you don't understand, Elon. People's lives are always involved. But without risk, there's no reward. Without pushing boundaries, we're stagnant. And you know that better than anyone. Elon's mind raced. Nathan's words had a haunting clarity to them, but they didn't ease his doubts. He had always been someone willing to take risks, but this felt different. Nathan wasn't just suggesting a new rocket design or a better engine. He was talking about bending the laws of physics itself. One wrong move, and they could create a disaster of epic proportions. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt uncertain. He had been sure that his partnership with Nathan would lead to breakthroughs that could change the course of history. But now, he wasn't so sure. Was this partnership going to take them to the stars, or was it leading them down a path they weren't ready for? The next few days were tense. Every conversation with Nathan felt more like a battle than a collaboration. Nathan's confidence was unshaken, but Elon's doubts had started to fester. It wasn't just about the science anymore. There was something in Nathan's demeanor, his single-mindedness, that rubbed Elon the wrong way. It wasn't arrogance, exactly, but there was a sense that Nathan didn't care about the practicalities of the world, about the people who would be affected by his ideas. And then, there was the team. Elon had always prided himself on the people he surrounded himself with. Brilliant, driven, and capable individuals who shared his vision. But as Nathan's influence grew within SpaceX, a rift began to form. Nathan's presence created a sense of division among the engineers and scientists. Some of them were awestruck by his brilliance, eager to embrace his unorthodox ideas. Others were more cautious, afraid of what might happen if Nathan's theories were wrong. The team that had once worked seamlessly together now found themselves on opposing sides, with Elon caught in the middle. One afternoon, during a team meeting, things came to a head. As Nathan presented a new set of calculations, one of SpaceX's senior engineers, Greg, raised his hand. Wait a second, Greg said, his voice tinged with disbelief. You're saying that we can't just improve the technology we already have. We have to rewrite everything? That's what you're proposing. Nathan's eyes flashed. Yes, everything. What we have right now is outdated. It's a stepping stone, but nothing more. Elon could feel the tension rising. The room had gone quiet. The engineers exchanged uncertain glances, and Greg's face flushed with frustration. We're talking about changing the entire foundation of space travel, Greg said. How can you be so sure this will work? We're not in a lab experimenting with ideas. This is real life. People's lives are on the line. Nathan didn't back down. You're thinking too small. We're talking about the future of humanity. The stakes are much higher than just one mission, one failure, one setback. Elon stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Enough, he said, his voice sharp. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. But right now, I need to think. We all need to think. As he left the room, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The excitement was still there. The possibilities, the potential for something incredible. But so was the fear, the doubt, and the nagging feeling that they were heading towards something dangerous, something that might change everything, and not in a good way. The tension between Elon Musk and Nathan Parker reached a boiling point. Despite the promising ideas Nathan had shared, Elon found himself growing more cautious, more distant. The truth was, Elon had never been afraid of pushing boundaries. He thrived on it. But what Nathan proposed wasn't just about innovation. It was a leap into the unknown. It was asking them to redefine the very laws of nature, to bend reality itself, and that Elon wasn't sure he was ready for. But there was no turning back. Elon had invested too much into this partnership to walk away. The stakes were too high. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his ambitions, not just for SpaceX, but for humanity. This could be the breakthrough that propelled them to Mars, to other galaxies, if it worked. And if it didn't, the consequences were too grave to even consider. Still, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something unexpected. It was a late evening when Elon called Nathan into his private office. There was no preamble, no small talk, just the cold, hard reality of what they were facing. "I've been thinking about your ideas," Elon began, his voice steady but serious. "You've convinced me that what you're proposing could be the future. But I need to know, are you prepared for the consequences?" Nathan didn't flinch. His expression was still, focused. "I'm prepared. I've always been prepared. But this isn't just a new technology, Nathan. We're talking about fundamentally altering the way we understand the universe. What happens if it goes wrong?" Nathan's gaze was unwavering. "What happens if we don't try? What happens if we remain stuck in the limitations of the past? We'll never reach Mars, Elon. We'll never achieve the things we're capable of. We're just playing catch-up." Elon stood, walking to the large window of his office that overlooked the SpaceX launch pad. The night was quiet, but the weight of the decision before him hung in the air like an impending storm. He had always been driven by a desire to go further, faster, and harder than anyone else. But this was different. This was uncharted territory. "I'm not worried about what's possible," Elon said quietly. "I'm worried about what's at stake." Nathan walked over to him, standing next to the window. "Elon, think about what we're really trying to do. This isn't just about rockets. This isn't even just about Mars. This is about the future of humanity. We're on the verge of unlocking something that could change everything." Elon turned to face him, his eyes narrowing. "So you're telling me we should take the risk, without understanding the full extent of the consequences?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Because the alternative is stagnation. And I know you're not interested in that." Elon's mind raced. He had always been a man of bold moves, of making the impossible happen. But this was something entirely different. The silence between them stretched on, thick with the weight of the decision. Finally, Elon sighed. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We move forward. But we do it on my terms. No more secrets. No more half-steps. If we're doing this, we're all in." Nathan's lips curled into a slight smile. "Agreed." With the decision made, the next few weeks were a blur of activity. Teams of engineers, scientists, and mathematicians worked around the clock, gathering data, running simulations, and testing theories. Nathan's proposals were lofty, sometimes borderline incomprehensible, but his mind was sharp and precise. Every equation, every idea he presented had a purpose, even if, at times, it seemed like they were attempting to rewrite the very nature of physics. As the team dove deeper into their work, Elon's role became more of a bystander than a leader. He was there, overseeing everything, but he wasn't the one making the breakthroughs. Nathan was in his element, effortlessly solving problems that would have taken years for the brightest minds in the world to even begin to understand. But as the work accelerated, so did the pressure. There was a growing unease in the air. The team, once united, had begun to splinter. Some members, like Greg and others who had been more cautious from the beginning, began to voice their concerns more openly. They wanted proof, real, tangible proof, that what they were doing wasn't just some far-off theory that would crash and burn. But Nathan wasn't concerned with proving anything. To him, the work spoke for itself. He had no patience for skepticism. Every question, every doubt was a distraction from the mission. One night, as Elon sat in his office staring at the progress reports, he received a call from Greg. "Elon, we need to talk." Greg's voice was low, urgent. "This is getting out of hand. Nathan, he's pushing the team too hard. We're getting close to the edge, and I'm not sure we can stop if something goes wrong." Elon listened carefully, trying to understand where Greg was coming from. There had been whispers among the team, rumors that Nathan's theories weren't just groundbreaking. They were dangerous. "I know," Elon replied quietly, "but we've come too far to turn back now." "You're not hearing me, Elon," Greg insisted. "If we keep going down this path, there won't be a way to undo it. Nathan is trying to change the laws of physics. That's not just risky. That's reckless." Elon didn't respond right away. He knew Greg was right, but the temptation to keep pushing forward was too strong. He had made a commitment to this journey, and he wasn't about to back down now. We'll keep moving forward, Greg. But we'll do it carefully, Elon said, his voice calm, though his mind was anything but. As the final tests were being prepared, the tension within SpaceX reached a fever pitch. Elon was under more pressure than ever. The company, the mission, and his own reputation were all on the line. This wasn't just another innovation. This was the kind of breakthrough that could either cement his legacy or destroy it. It was the night before the first real test of Nathan's theories. The launch pad was empty, silent under the moonlight. The engineers were working late, fine-tuning every detail of the spacecraft that was about to carry Nathan's concept into the unknown. Elon stood on the observation deck, staring out at the vastness of space. "Are you sure about this?" Elon asked himself, though he wasn't sure who he was asking. Nathan had been right about one thing. They were on the edge of something massive, something that could change everything. But they were also standing on the edge of a cliff, with nothing but the unknown ahead. Nathan stood beside him, his face calm, but there was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "It's time," Nathan said softly. "We're ready." Elon looked at him, feeling the weight of the moment. "This could change everything, Nathan. For better or worse." Nathan's eyes locked with his. "We won't know until we try." And with that, they both turned toward the launch pad, where history was about to be made. The quiet hum of activity at SpaceX's headquarters was soon replaced by the roar of engines as the moment of truth approached. Elon Musk stood on the observation deck, his eyes trained on the launch pad far below. The spacecraft, designed with Nathan Parker's theories in mind, sat at the center, its sleek, silver body reflecting the lights of the launch area. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, an idea that had come from the mind of a genius too bold for his own good. Around Elon, the atmosphere was tense. The team had gathered, but no one spoke. They were all watching, waiting. The anticipation was electric. Nathan was a few steps behind Elon, standing next to the control center, eyes glued to the digital readouts. The young genius had barely slept in days, consumed by the need to see his vision realized. Elon could feel his presence, a force of nature, just as intense and focused as the rocket poised to take off. There was no turning back now. Elon's mind raced, but his face remained impassive. He had watched rockets launch countless times before, but this felt different. There was more at stake here than just a successful mission. This was about everything. About the future of SpaceX, of space exploration, and, maybe most importantly, about his relationship with Nathan. If this worked, it could change the world. But if it didn't, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Elon's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something he had overlooked. Every fiber of his being told him that this wasn't just another test. This wasn't a typical launch. He had already gone beyond the limits of what he knew. And now, standing on the edge, he couldn't help but wonder if Nathan was right all along, or if they were about to make a fatal mistake. 5, 4, 3. There was a sharp beep from the control center. Elon's head snapped toward the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. One of the engineers, looking pale, stood frozen in front of the console, staring at the data that was streaming in front of him. "Elon, something's wrong," the engineer said, his voice trembling. Before Elon could react, the spacecraft's engines roared to life, surging forward in a blinding flash of light. The force of the launch sent shockwaves through the entire area, rattling the glass of the observation deck. Nathan's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He hadn't expected the launch to be smooth, but this was nothing like he had imagined. Within seconds, however, the trajectory of the rocket deviated. It was small at first, barely noticeable, but the trajectory slowly veered off course, drifting away from the expected path. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Elon shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. The control room erupted into chaos. Engineers scrambled, fingers flying across keyboards, desperately trying to regain control. But nothing seemed to respond. The spacecraft was slipping further out of reach, and every second felt like an eternity. The massive rocket, built from Nathan's revolutionary designs, was spiraling into uncharted space. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he rushed to the control room. Nathan stood there, silent, watching with a mixture of awe and dread. His theories were coming to life, but not in the way he had imagined. The spacecraft's unexpected path took it farther and farther from Earth's atmosphere. It was heading straight into deep space, beyond anything they could have predicted. "Elon," Nathan started, his voice strangely calm, but Elon could barely hear him over the cacophony of alarms and voices shouting in panic. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Elon muttered, more to himself than to Nathan. The rocket's momentum was increasing, far faster than anticipated. The data from the flight path was erratic, showing no signs of slowing down. Suddenly, the spacecraft's communication signal went dark. For what felt like an eternity, no one spoke. The room was frozen in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone like a dark cloud. Nathan turned toward Elon, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and terror. This is what I wanted," Nathan said, his voice trembling. "I wanted to break the boundaries of space, of physics itself." Elon's eyes burned with frustration, but also with a sense of disbelief. "You wanted to break boundaries, Nathan? This wasn't a breakthrough. This was a disaster. You didn't even think about the risks. How could you not see this coming?" Nathan's lips pressed together in a thin line, but his eyes never left Elon's. There was no remorse, only an intensity that was both fascinating and frightening. "Elon," Nathan said, "this was never supposed to be easy. You know that. This is bigger than all of us. It's bigger than you or me." Elon felt his hands ball into fists. He had to admit, there was a part of him that was exhilarated by the sheer scale of what they were attempting. But another part of him was terrified. They had gambled everything on this idea, and now they were facing the consequences. It wasn't just a failed launch. This was a game-changing event, one that no one had predicted. It wasn't until the screen flickered that the full reality of the situation hit. A red warning light flashed at the top of the screen. "Spacecraft loss of control, unknown cause, communication lost." Elon's breath caught in his throat. The spacecraft was gone. Out of their reach. Out of control. "This can't be happening," Elon whispered. "We've lost it." Nathan stood motionless for a long moment, the reality of what had just unfolded sinking in. The ship they had launched wasn't just some test mission. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for, everything he had dreamed of. And now, it was lost. For the first time, Elon saw a flicker of doubt in Nathan's eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. The man who had once been so sure, so confident, now seemed to hesitate, as if he was beginning to understand the enormity of the situation. "Is this what you wanted?" Elon snapped, his voice sharp. "Is this the future you envisioned?" Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, his gaze fell to the ground, the weight of failure pressing on his shoulders. Nathan began, then stopped, struggling to find the right words. "We pushed too far, too fast. I thought we could handle it. But we didn't." For the first time in his life, Elon saw the genius before him vulnerable, utterly human. As the hours passed, SpaceX's control room became eerily quiet. Engineers had already begun working on ways to track the lost spacecraft, though it was clear that any attempt to recover it would be futile without clear communication. Elon, however, couldn't stop replaying the events in his mind. He knew that this was more than just a failure. It was the first true test of Nathan's vision, and they had failed. Meanwhile, Nathan had retreated into a corner of the room, his face buried in his hands. Elon had expected anger, perhaps defiance, but there was none of that, only a deep, heavy silence. For the first time, Nathan had been forced to confront the true cost of his ambition. Elon wasn't sure what would happen next. He had always known that great risks came with great rewards, but this time, the cost of their failure seemed to be far greater than any reward could ever be. The night stretched on, and as the team worked tirelessly to assess the damage, Elon stood by the observation window once again. His mind was clouded, and the weight of responsibility felt more suffocating than ever. For the first time in years, Elon wasn't sure if he had made the right decision. The next morning, the atmosphere at SpaceX was somber. The usual hum of excitement was replaced by a cold, heavy silence that hung over the office like a storm cloud. Elon walked through the halls, nodding at engineers and technicians, but not a word was exchanged. Everyone knew what had happened. The catastrophic failure of the spacecraft wasn't just a setback, it was a wake-up call. It reminded them of the harsh reality of space exploration. The margin for error was razor-thin, but amidst the weight of the failure, there was something else, a flicker of hope. Elon had always been a man who thrived on adversity. Every challenge was an opportunity, every failure a lesson. And now, more than ever, he had to find that next step. He had no choice. Too much was at stake, not just for SpaceX but for the future of humanity. He couldn't afford to wallow in despair. The road to Mars, to the stars, was paved with mistakes. This one, however, felt different. He didn't want to admit it, but the truth was staring him in the face. Nathan's vision, though brilliant, was reckless. They had pushed too far, too fast, and the consequences had been catastrophic. Yet, Nathan wasn't giving up. In fact, he had been more determined than ever since the disaster. Elon knew it wouldn't be long before Nathan would come to him with another plan, a better plan. The question was, would Elon be ready to take that leap again? Nathan had not slept a wink since the launch. After the spacecraft disappeared into deep space, he retreated to his lab, refusing to leave. He was consumed with thoughts of what went wrong, where his calculations had failed, why the ship had veered off course, and what they could do to fix it. For Nathan, this failure wasn't an option. His entire life had been building toward this moment. If anything, this was a sign that he was on the right track. He wasn't afraid of failure. He embraced it. It was the only way to push boundaries. When Elon arrived at Nathan's lab later that morning, he found the young genius hunched over a pile of data, scribbling equations furiously on a whiteboard. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but there was a fire in them that Elon had seen only a few times before. "Nathan," Elon called, his voice low, but carrying a weight of authority. Nathan didn't look up. He was absorbed in his work, as if nothing had happened. He had this ability to block out everything else when his mind was on something. It was both his greatest strength and his most dangerous flaw. "I'm not giving up on this, Elon," Nathan said without turning around. "We can fix this. I know it." Elon didn't reply right away. He stepped closer to the whiteboard, studying the equations that were scrawled there. Some of them made sense, but others were nothing short of madness. Nathan was pushing the limits of what was possible, and maybe even beyond. But Elon wasn't sure if this was the right path. Not anymore. "Nathan," Elon began slowly. "The last test wasn't just a failure. It was a wake-up call. We pushed too far, too fast. And I don't want to risk everything on another gamble." Nathan's eyes flicked up to meet Elon's. His expression was intense, almost defiant. "Elon, you've always said that taking risks is part of the game. That without risk, we're just stagnating. You've been pushing SpaceX to go to Mars, right? To make humanity a multiplanetary species. Well, this is the next step. The rocket. We were on the verge of something huge. We can fix this. We have to." Elon let out a long sigh, rubbing his temple. He had heard this before, but there was something different in Nathan's tone. This wasn't about just proving a theory anymore. Nathan truly believed that the future was at stake. He was so consumed by his vision that he couldn't see the risks in the same way Elon did. "This isn't just about reaching Mars, Nathan. This is about human lives, about the future of space exploration. We can't afford to make another mistake like this." Nathan stood up and wiped his hands on his pants. His face softened for a brief moment, and he walked over to Elon, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. "I get it, Elon. You're worried. But if we stop now, we might as well quit. You've spent your entire life creating SpaceX to push boundaries, to break through limits. If we don't go after this now, then what was the point of everything we've done so far? What's the point of the Mars mission?" Elon felt the weight of Nathan's words settle on his chest. He had spent his entire life chasing the impossible. But the cost of that dream had always been high, and now, standing on the precipice of this new frontier, he wasn't sure if it was worth it anymore. But deep down, he knew Nathan was right. Elon paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. He looked at Nathan, not just as a partner or a visionary, but as a man who, despite his brilliance, had been reckless. And yet, in that recklessness, there was a kind of genius. He had the ability to see the world differently, to imagine things that no one else could. That was why Elon had brought him on board in the first place. "You're right," Elon finally said, his voice low but firm. "We can't stop. But we can't keep doing this blindly either. We need a plan. A backup. A way to make sure we don't lose control again." Nathan nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I agree. We'll fix the calculations. We'll integrate failsafes. But we need to take another step. This can't be about just technology anymore. We need the right kind of team. A team that can understand the dangers and the rewards." Elon looked at him, his mind racing. A new plan. A safer one. One that still held the promise of greatness but accounted for the risks. He could see it in Nathan's eyes, the unyielding belief that they could still make it work. "I'll give you one more shot," Elon said, surprising even himself. "But this time, we do it carefully. No shortcuts. We work out every variable, every possible outcome. And if there's even a hint that it's going to fail, we stop." Nathan's smile was small but triumphant. "Deal." In the weeks that followed, Elon and Nathan worked tirelessly. Every engineer, every scientist, every technician was pulled into this new phase of the project. They were working with precision, with a sense of urgency, but also with a newfound caution. They reviewed every equation, double-checked every simulation, and built in layers of security that were meant to safeguard against the risks they had overlooked before. Elon was more hands-on than ever. He sat with Nathan, going over the designs and proposals, pushing him to think through every possible outcome. It was hard for Nathan. He didn't like constraints, didn't like slowing down, but he understood. This was no longer just about his vision. This was about making sure they could still get to that vision without jeopardizing everything they had worked for. As the tests began again, there was a noticeable shift. The air was still electric with excitement, but now there was a sense of cautious optimism. The first few simulations were promising, and for the first time since the disaster, Elon felt a renewed sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had found a way to break through the limits without breaking everything else along with it. The real test was still ahead, but for now, they had taken the first step on the road to redemption. Weeks had passed since Elon and Nathan had made the decision to move forward cautiously. The engineers at SpaceX were working around the clock, rechecking every equation, recalibrating the spacecraft systems, and building in layers of fail-safes that were intended to protect the mission from disaster. Elon was more involved than ever, pushing Nathan to test every boundary while maintaining a tight rein on the risks. The team's unity had solidified into a singular purpose: to make this next test successful, no matter the cost. Yet, as the launch day approached, the same questions lingered in Elon's mind. Would this new design work? Would they finally reach a point where their vision could be realized without catastrophe? And more importantly, could Nathan, for all his genius, truly balance the ambition with the practicality required to make the mission a success? In the briefing room, Elon sat at the head of the table, eyes locked on Nathan, who was pacing back and forth in front of a large screen showing the spacecraft's final design. There was an energy in the room, an excitement, but also a palpable tension. No one spoke as Nathan finished the presentation, his hands sweeping over the projected data, charts, and simulations. "This is it," Nathan said, turning to face the room. His voice was steady, but there was a trace of nervousness behind his eyes. "This is the culmination of everything we've worked for. The spacecraft is stable, the systems are in place, and we've tested every variable. It's time." Elon stood up slowly, crossing his arms as he surveyed the room. His gaze lingered on the engineers, the scientists, the team that had put their faith in Nathan and his designs. They had worked tirelessly to get here, but deep down, Elon knew that they were all still walking a tightrope. This test would determine whether their vision would continue, or whether they would be forced to acknowledge the dangers of pushing beyond human limits. "I believe in this team," Elon said, his voice low and purposeful. "But I also know the risks. If anything goes wrong this time, it's not just on Nathan or any one of us. It's on all of us." Nathan's eyes met Elon's, and for a brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were no longer adversaries, nor were they just colleagues. They were partners in this dangerous, high-stakes game of space exploration. And this final test, would either break them or propel them to greatness. The morning of the launch, SpaceX's headquarters was abuzz with activity. The launch pad was crowded with engineers, techs, and media, all standing in anticipation of what had the potential to be one of the most significant moments in the company's history. Elon stood near the back of the crowd, watching the engineers as they made their final checks, and Nathan stood beside him, a look of quiet confidence on his face. For the first time, Nathan's usual bravado had given way to a more subdued, almost reverential demeanor. He knew the stakes now. This wasn't just about his theories anymore. It was about the team that had supported him, the people whose livelihoods were tied to the success of SpaceX. The weight of that responsibility was heavier than any equation he had ever solved. Elon felt the tension building, but he kept his face neutral. The countdown had begun. 10, 9, 8. The seconds stretched on, and with each passing moment, it became more real. He could hear the engineers communicating, their voices clipped and precise as they confirmed the final systems checks. At T-1 minute, the room went completely silent. Everyone turned to watch the massive spacecraft sitting on the launch pad, the gleaming silver body now ready to lift off into the unknown. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. "Everything's clear, Elon," one of the engineers said. "All systems go." Elon nodded, and as he turned his gaze toward Nathan, he saw the same look of focused determination that had defined him since the beginning. This time, however, Nathan wasn't just pushing boundaries for the sake of it. He was doing it because he believed they could make a difference. He believed this was the future. "Are you ready?" Elon asked. Nathan glanced over, his expression unwavering. "I've never been more ready." As the countdown hit 0, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The engines of the spacecraft ignited with a deafening roar, sending a surge of heat and light into the sky. The spacecraft lifted off the pad, its sleek body cutting through the air like a bullet. For a moment, time seemed to slow as everyone stood in awe of the sheer power and elegance of the launch. Elon's heart raced as he watched the spacecraft ascend. For a brief second, he felt a surge of pride. This was what they had worked for. This was the dream that had driven SpaceX to greater heights. But then, something unexpected happened. The rocket's trajectory shifted, just slightly, but enough to catch everyone's attention. Elon's gut clenched, and he turned to the engineers. The calm confidence on their faces evaporated as they began analyzing the data. Nathan's eyes flickered from the screen to the launch, his mind processing the information at an incredible speed. "Is it stable?" Elon asked, his voice tight. "I'm not sure," one of the engineers said, his tone grim. "There's a slight deviation from the planned trajectory, but the systems are holding for now." Elon didn't answer. He didn't want to acknowledge it. Not yet. He could see the spacecraft moving higher, its speed increasing as it soared toward the edge of the atmosphere. They were nearing the point of no return. Minutes later, the spacecraft had passed through the stratosphere, and it was rapidly approaching the point where it would break through Earth's atmosphere. The engineers had regained control of the trajectory, but a sense of unease still lingered in the air. Elon's mind raced. Everything was riding on this moment. This was their chance to prove that Nathan's vision wasn't a fluke, that it wasn't just a grand idea that would burn up in the atmosphere. Nathan, too, was watching intently, but his eyes were locked on the data. Every system check, every reading from the spacecraft seemed to be coming back with positive results. They were stabilizing. The ship was holding its course. And then, the moment came. The spacecraft reached the edge of space, and the communications systems flickered. There was a moment of static, followed by a voice, distorted, but unmistakable. "We're good. We're going to make it. We've passed the upper atmosphere. We've done it." A collective cheer erupted from the engineers, and even Elon felt a small, triumphant smile tug at the corners of his lips. For the first time in what felt like forever, they had done it. They had crossed the boundary. The spacecraft was now safely in orbit. Nathan's face broke into a rare grin. For once, it wasn't about proving a point or showing off his brilliance. It was about the accomplishment. the realization that they had achieved something monumental. Elon turned to him. "You did it." Nathan's grin widened, but there was a look in his eyes, one that spoke volumes. "We did it." The launch was a success, but the true implications of what they had just achieved were still sinking in. For Elon, the victory was tempered with a sense of awe and disbelief. They had pushed past the limits, and now the doors had opened for humanity to venture further into space than they had ever dreamed. As Nathan stared at the spacecraft's path on the screen, Elon couldn't help but wonder where this would lead. The future was now wide open, but the questions were endless. What was next? What new boundaries would they push? And, perhaps most importantly, what was the cost of that relentless pursuit? Nathan turned to Elon, his expression serious. "What do we do now?" Elon looked out at the stars on the monitor, his mind racing with possibilities. "Now, we aim higher, and we never stop." In the days following the successful launch, SpaceX was a buzz of activity. The air of celebration was palpable. Engineers, scientists, and technicians walked with a newfound confidence, knowing that they had just achieved something incredible. The spacecraft, now safely in orbit, was proof that their hard work, their long hours, and their commitment to the mission had paid off. But Elon Musk, despite the success, was not one to dwell long on victories. His mind was already focused on the next step, the next challenge. He stood in his office, looking out over the sprawling SpaceX campus, his thoughts racing. What had started as a single idea, a mission to Mars, had now turned into something far larger, far more ambitious than he had ever imagined. The successful orbit of the spacecraft was just the beginning. Nathan, on the other hand, was feeling the thrill of accomplishment. For days, he had been reflecting on the technical aspects of the mission, the numbers, the calculations, the design. But beyond that, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. This was the first time that he, as an individual, had been proven right on such a large scale. Despite Elon's initial doubts, his risky vision had been validated. Nathan's mind, however, was always ahead. He wasn't content with the orbit. He had his sights set on something far more distant. He wanted to push boundaries even further, toward the stars, to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and beyond. Elon's pragmatism and caution were important, but Nathan knew that if they were to truly break the mold, they would need to aim even higher, think bigger, and take greater risks. Elon, though, had learned a valuable lesson. It was one thing to push for bold dreams, but another to do so with methodical precision. This victory hadn't come from a random stroke of genius. It had come from careful planning, constant revision, and relentless testing. Elon's instincts told him that it wasn't just Nathan's brilliance that had made this mission successful, but the teamwork, the safety nets, and the careful application of risks. But now, as Nathan and the team celebrated, Elon began to realize something he hadn't anticipated. His next challenge wasn't in the stars. It was much closer to home. Elon had always prided himself on being a visionary, a man who saw the future before anyone else did. But after this latest success, a new issue began to loom large on the horizon: the growing rivalry with other space agencies and private companies. SpaceX had made great strides, but the world was quickly catching up. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic, and even NASA were all vying for their own place in space exploration. The race was becoming more intense, and the stakes were higher than ever. While SpaceX had the edge with its reusable rocket technology and its historic leap to Mars, Elon knew that the competition wouldn't sit back and let them continue to dominate. For the first time, he understood the true pressure of maintaining that lead. But there was more to it than just competition. Elon's next concern was the sustainability of their endeavors. As the missions grew more ambitious, as the dreams of Mars colonization took shape, the question of funding and resources loomed large. The failure of a single mission could derail everything. The money, the technology, the lives of those involved, it all depended on the next steps. And as much as Elon wanted to continue exploring new horizons, he couldn't shake the anxiety that came with it. He thought about the next mission, going beyond low Earth orbit, onto the Moon, then Mars. They would need a much larger fleet. They would need bases on the Moon to support missions to Mars. They would need international collaboration. The The technical side of things was already mapped out, but the political and financial sides of the equation were still uncertain. Space exploration wasn't just about rockets. It was about diplomacy, investment, and partnerships. Elon was snapped out of his thoughts by the sudden appearance of Nathan, who had come to his office to discuss the next phase of the mission. Nathan wasted no time in getting to the point. Elon, I have a new proposal. The next mission, after we stabilize the current spacecraft, should be the first manned mission to Mars. We've been testing the tech for years. It's time to make the leap. I've been working on a plan for the entire mission, the launch, the crew, the landing, and even the return. Elon raised an eyebrow. You're pushing for Mars already? That's a huge leap from where we are. Nathan leaned forward, eyes alight with excitement. I know, but think about it. We've gotten the spacecraft into orbit. The technology is already in place. We've built the infrastructure, the systems. What we need now is to push for the next phase. This is what SpaceX was built for. We're not just launching satellites or sending cargo. We're making history. Elon sat back in his chair, arms crossed. You're not wrong, Nathan, but that's a massive undertaking. A manned mission to Mars involves more than just technology. It's about resources, training, logistics, and the international partnerships, Nathan interrupted, grinning. I've already started the talks. I've reached out to international space agencies, private companies, and even some governments. They're all interested. Everyone knows that the race to Mars will define the next chapter of space exploration. Elon looked at Nathan for a long moment, considering his words. The man had a vision, no doubt about that. But was he rushing ahead too quickly? The failure of the previous mission still weighed heavily on his mind. Yet, something about Nathan's unwavering belief in the mission struck a chord with Elon. Nathan had that fire, that relentless drive. And it was contagious. We'll need to be sure, Elon said after a pause. We can't afford to take unnecessary risks again. But if this plan holds up, we might just be able to do it. We'll take the time we need to get everything in place. Nathan nodded eagerly. Agreed. But we'll need to move fast. The competition won't wait for us. Elon chuckled, though it was tinged with both resolve and worry. They never do. News of SpaceX's successful spacecraft launch spread like wildfire. The media was abuzz with excitement. International space agencies, corporations, and government officials took notice. And before long, SpaceX found itself at the center of the world's attention. NASA, the European Space Agency, and other private companies began reaching out, eager to either collaborate or compete. As the global conversation about space exploration began to intensify, Elon knew that this was their moment. They had the upper hand, but for how long? To maintain that lead, SpaceX would need to do something unprecedented. Not just beat their rivals to Mars, but build the future of interplanetary travel. They would need to unite the best minds, the best technology, and the best resources to make it happen. The stakes were no longer just about SpaceX. They were about humanity's future in space. As the world watched, Elon made a decision. He would lead SpaceX toward the next giant leap. And this time, he would make sure that the risks were worth the rewards. Elon sat alone in his office that night, staring at the large map of Mars on his wall. He had spent years imagining this moment. The question wasn't whether they could get there. It was whether they could sustain themselves once they did. For Mars to be viable as a human outpost, there were countless obstacles to overcome. Resource management, environmental hazards, life support, communication, and more. But none of that mattered to Nathan, and now, not to Elon either. This was the next frontier. His hand hovered over the button to schedule the meeting that would start the ball rolling. In the end, the question wasn't about whether they could do it. The question was whether they were willing to risk everything to make it happen. With a deep breath, Elon pressed the button. The road to Mars had officially begun. Elon's decision to push forward with the manned mission to Mars sent shockwaves through the global space community. In the weeks that followed, SpaceX found itself thrust into the center of a high-stakes political and technological maelstrom. The attention they had garnered with their successful launch was nothing compared to what was now unfolding. Countries, corporations, and the public were watching, and everyone had an opinion on what SpaceX should do next. Within the halls of SpaceX, The mood had shifted from cautious optimism to all-out determination. Elon's team was working day and night to refine the plan for the Mars mission, and Nathan's vision for the future of human space exploration was beginning to take shape, faster than anyone had expected. Yet, despite the internal progress, Elon knew the most difficult challenges were still ahead. The pressure was mounting from all sides. The global competition had just turned into a race not only for Mars, but for the future of human civilization in space. With other companies like Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic pushing forward, along with NASA's renewed focus on its Artemis program to return to the moon, Elon knew they couldn't afford to relax. SpaceX had to be the first, again. For Nathan, the global spotlight was both a gift and a curse. The brilliant, but often temperamental, genius who had once been seen as an outsider was now being heralded as the future of space exploration. But with that fame came an equal amount of scrutiny. As the media buzz grew louder, the pressure on Nathan to deliver only intensified. His calculations had worked once, but would they work again? Would the next mission push him, or them, all over the edge? In an unprecedented move, Elon and Nathan sat down for a high-profile meeting with representatives from several international space agencies. Elon had spent years building relationships with both private and governmental entities, but now, in the wake of the successful launch, he was forced to negotiate on a much larger scale. The room was filled with some of the most powerful people in global space exploration. The head of NASA, the European Space Agency's director, and representatives from China, Russia, and India were all present, along with representatives from private companies including Blue Origin, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin. As Elon and Nathan walked into the room, the tension was palpable. The large conference table was surrounded by men and women who had, until now, viewed SpaceX as a competitor. But now, with Mars in their sights, the conversation was about more than just who would get there first. It was about how they would all collaborate, or at least coexist, in this new era of space exploration. Elon opened the meeting with a simple statement. We're not here to compete with each other. We're here to make history. We're here to push the boundaries of what humanity can do. To do that, we need to come together. The race to Mars is too big for anyone to do alone. The room fell silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the representatives spoke. The United States and Europe expressed strong interest in collaborating with SpaceX, acknowledging the company's leadership in reusable rocket technology. The Russian and Chinese space programs, on the other hand, were more cautious, with a focus on national pride and the political implications of working with private companies. There were murmurs about trade secrets, military technology, and the future of space as a geopolitical battleground. Nathan sat quietly beside Elon, his sharp mind processing the conversation at a rapid pace. He understood the dynamics at play. These were not just technical discussions. These were the discussions that would shape the future of humanity in space. A misstep could unravel everything they had worked for. After hours of negotiation, Elon proposed an idea that would later become the foundation of the Mars mission. Rather than direct collaboration, they would create a shared framework for cooperation, an international consortium that would provide support and resources for the mission. Each country and company would bring their own strengths to the table, from launch systems to life support technologies, but the leadership would remain with SpaceX. It was a bold move, and the room was divided. But, in the end, everyone agreed on the potential. Elon had not just secured partnerships. He had laid the groundwork for an unprecedented global effort. SpaceX wasn't just about to reach Mars. They were going to take the world along for the ride. As the international framework for Mars exploration began to take shape, the pressure on SpaceX to meet its ambitious deadlines only increased. Elon and Nathan knew that the next mission, manned and ambitious, would be the ultimate test of everything they had learned, everything they had worked for. They began to assemble their crew, selecting astronauts who had been trained for years to survive in space. But now, they would be asked to survive on Mars. The spacecraft had been tested in orbit, but the mission required far more. The technical challenges were daunting. Could they sustain a colony on Mars for extended periods? Could the crew survive the harsh Martian environment? What kind of resources would they need? How could they protect the astronauts from the devastating effects of radiation? Nathan, as always, was obsessed with the science. He began to lead the team of engineers, chemists, and biologists who would work on solutions to these problems. The team was split between two tasks: ensuring that the spacecraft itself was ready for the journey and preparing the technology that would allow them to establish a self-sustaining colony on Mars. Elon was constantly by Nathan's side, watching with a mixture of awe and anxiety as the team pushed the limits of human ingenuity. But Elon had learned something crucial during the months of preparation. The mission to Mars wasn't just about space technology, it was about human resilience. It was about the unwavering belief that the impossible could be made possible. It was about a team willing to risk everything to achieve something greater than themselves. And then, one day, as they began their final testing phase, a new issue arose. A potential flaw in the spacecraft's fuel systems. A slight discrepancy in the readings. One that could prove catastrophic if it weren't addressed immediately. Elon and Nathan stood together in front of a massive display showing the spacecraft's fuel systems. The engineers were running diagnostics, but the problem was real. The launch window was fast approaching, and every moment counted. "We can't afford to delay," Nathan said, his voice low but urgent. "We've already pushed the timeline so far." Elon studied the screen for a moment, then turned to the engineers. "Find the solution. Now." The team worked furiously, running tests, recalibrating the systems, and tweaking the designs. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If the spacecraft didn't work, the mission would be delayed, perhaps indefinitely. If that happened, the entire global framework they had worked so hard to build might collapse. Elon watched in tense silence as the engineers worked. For once, even Nathan seemed to be holding his breath. Finally, after hours of testing and retesting, the problem was resolved. The systems were stable. The countdown could continue. But the experience had shaken Elon. For the first time since he started SpaceX, he realized just how fragile this mission really was. Every step forward was a gamble. Every failure, no matter how small, could change everything. As they moved forward, the question was no longer whether they could reach Mars. It was whether they could survive the journey once they did. That night, Elon found himself standing outside SpaceX headquarters, looking up at the stars. His mind was racing with the enormity of what lay ahead. The mission was closer than ever, but there was still so much uncertainty. Would they succeed? Would Nathan's genius be enough to get them there? He thought about the global partnerships, the competition, the risks. And then he thought about the astronauts who would be the first to step foot on Mars, their lives resting on the work they were doing now. "Are we ready for this?" he whispered to himself. The wind blew lightly as he stared into the night sky, and for the briefest of moments, he felt both a sense of awe and a deep sense of responsibility. The road to Mars was more than a mission. It was a promise to the future. And that promise, Elon knew, was worth everything they were about to risk. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the date for the Mars mission loomed closer, SpaceX found itself in a constant state of flux, intensity coursing through the air as final preparations were made. The whole world was waiting. The spacecraft was ready. The astronauts were ready. The mission parameters were set. But for Elon and Nathan, this was the most critical phase. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. This wasn't just about reaching Mars. It was about survival. 4 days, the team worked tirelessly to finalize the fuel systems, recalibrate the life support units, and run tests. Every sensor, every module, every small piece of technology had to be flawless. Failure at this stage would mean losing years of work, a massive blow to their credibility, and perhaps most devastating of all, the loss of the opportunity to fulfill a dream bigger than anything they had ever attempted before. Nathan, ever the perfectionist, found himself on the ground level of every test. His mind moved with lightning speed, calculating the systems, envisioning every potential failure and solution. He had pushed everyone hard, perhaps too hard at times, but the results were undeniable. The spacecraft was in the final stages of readiness. Elon, though, still felt that gnawing doubt in his stomach. It wasn't the technology that worried him. SpaceX had proven its ability to innovate and execute. It was the human element. The pressure on the astronauts was enormous. Not only did they have to survive a trip that no human had ever taken before, but they would have to build the foundation for a Martian colony. It was a monumental responsibility, and one that, if mishandled, could have disastrous consequences. Elon and Nathan both spent time with the crew, making sure they were mentally and physically prepared for what lay ahead. The astronauts were a team of 4. Commander David Larkin, a former Navy pilot with extensive spaceflight experience. Dr. Clara Torres, an astronaut physician and biologist. Michael Reed, an engineer who had spent years working with NASA on Mars mission simulations. And Lena Fox, a systems specialist with expertise in life support and environmental controls. David Larkin, the mission commander, was calm and composed, but even he couldn't escape the weight of what they were about to do. "We're not just making history, we're making a future," he had said during one of their final meetings. His voice had a sense of conviction that resonated with everyone in the room. Yet, there was something else in his eyes, an understanding that everything could go wrong. Clara Torres had always been a calm presence. She had spent years researching how the human body would react to prolonged space travel and the conditions of Mars, but there was still so much unknown. The psychological and physical toll of the mission was staggering. She and Michael spent long hours reviewing the health and safety protocols, preparing for any emergency that could arise. But the true pressure was on Lena. She was the one who would be responsible for ensuring the life support systems, the critical backbone of the mission, functioned flawlessly. The thought of being the one responsible for maintaining the safety of the crew on Mars weighed heavily on her mind. All of them had come to understand that success was far from guaranteed. They were not just astronauts, they were pioneers, and if they failed, they would become the tragic symbol of humanity's overreach. The days leading up to the launch felt like an eternity. Each moment was filled with testing, tweaking, and recalibrating systems. Elon and Nathan spent sleepless nights reviewing every aspect of the mission, adjusting launch parameters, ensuring fuel levels, recalculating the trajectory. The final checklist was being run over and over again until the slightest doubt had been chased away. And then, the day arrived. It was surreal, almost impossible to grasp. The mission to Mars, once an impossible dream, was about to become a reality. Elon stood on the launch pad, watching as the final checks were completed. The sun was just beginning to rise over the SpaceX facility, casting long shadows across the gleaming rocket. "We're really doing this," Nathan said, standing beside Elon. There was no excitement in his voice, only the heavy weight of reality. Elon nodded but didn't speak. He couldn't. The magnitude of the moment had silenced him. He watched as the final touches were added to the spacecraft, the sound of engineers and technicians working tirelessly in the background. The air was electric, filled with anticipation. Inside the spacecraft, the crew was preparing for their launch sequence. David Larkin's calm voice came through the comms. "Team, this is it. We're going to Mars. Stay sharp, stay focused, and trust the systems. We've trained for this." One by one, the astronauts boarded, strapping themselves into their seats. Every breath was deliberate, every movement controlled. Their hands hovered over the buttons, their eyes scanning the systems and status indicators. Everything had to go exactly according to plan. Elon and Nathan watched the countdown clock tick closer to 0. They exchanged a brief look, one that conveyed everything. The years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the failures, the triumphs, all leading up to this single, defining moment. 10:09:08. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he stood with Nathan. His mind raced through all the possibilities, the worst-case scenarios, the unexpected failures. But he forced himself to push those thoughts away. This was it. They were about to change the world. 3, 2, 1. The ground trembled beneath them as the rocket's engines roared to life. Fire and smoke erupted from the base of the spacecraft as it blasted off the ground, its massive engines pushing it into the sky at an unimaginable speed. Elon and Nathan stood there for a moment, the sound of the rocket's engines still echoing in their ears. The sheer power and force of the launch was almost too much to comprehend. They watched as the spacecraft shot into the sky, gaining speed and altitude. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Would it work? Would everything go according to plan? In the distance, the rocket became a mere speck against the blue sky, disappearing into the vastness of space. The entire team at SpaceX stood in silence, staring at the spot where the spacecraft had been. It felt like the world had held its breath and then released it all at once. Back at the command center, the countdown clock finally reached 0. The mission was officially underway. Elon and Nathan shared a brief, quiet moment. There were no words, just the understanding that everything they had worked for was now in motion. The future of humanity rested on this moment. There would be no turning back now. "We've done it," Nathan said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "We're not done yet," Elon replied, "but we're closer than ever." As they watched the launch unfold on the screens, both men knew this was just the beginning. The journey to Mars was long and full of unknowns, but they had taken the first step, and for that, they could breathe, just for a moment. The spacecraft had left Earth's orbit, and the crew was officially en route to Mars. For the next 6 months, the crew would be confined to a small space, separated from the rest of humanity by millions of miles of cold, unforgiving space. The journey, while meticulously planned, was still an enormous leap into the unknown. They had prepared for every possible scenario, but the reality of the situation was different. Inside the spacecraft, the astronauts settled into their routines. The narrow corridors were a far cry from the vastness of Earth. The hum of the life support systems and the constant glow of monitors were the only sounds that filled the silence of space. In a way, the ship felt like an extension of their own bodies, pulsing with life, yet encased in the most desolate environment imaginable. For David Larkin, the commander, this was a moment of reflection. He had spent his entire career in space, but never like this. No mission had ever felt this weighty. He was responsible for the lives of his crew, and the success or failure of the mission would echo through history. Every decision he made would matter, not just for them, but for the future of humanity itself. Clara Torres, the biologist and physician, was deep in her research, but she, too, could feel the enormity of what they were doing. She checked the astronauts' health daily, monitoring vitals, tracking their sleep cycles, and ensuring the life support systems were functioning flawlessly. Every new day brought with it a new set of challenges. How would the human body adjust to the long-term effects of deep space travel? And how would the isolation affect their mental health? Michael Reed, the engineer, was running constant diagnostics on the ship's systems, ensuring everything was running smoothly. His job was to ensure the spacecraft's integrity, from the propulsion system to the habitat's environmental control. Any small malfunction could jeopardize the mission, and the pressure was on. He spent hours poring over data, tweaking systems, making sure that nothing, no matter how small, was overlooked. And then there was Lena Fox, the systems specialist, who kept her eyes on the most critical aspect of the mission: life support. Her job was to ensure the crew could survive. She constantly recalibrated oxygen levels, water filtration, and food supplies, making sure that every element of the system was working in harmony. There was no room for error. For all of them, though, the space was silent. In the vast emptiness of space, the isolation was suffocating. The entire crew found themselves longing for the simple things: the sound of the wind, the warmth of the sun on their skin, the embrace of their families. But for now, there was nothing but the ship and each other. As the mission entered its second month, the first true test of their resilience came. A small, seemingly insignificant problem turned into a full-blown crisis. It started as a routine check of the oxygen system. Lena was running a diagnostic on one of the critical life support modules when the alarm sounded. It was a soft beep, almost too faint to hear at first, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Lena, what's going on?" David's voice crackled over the comms. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she scanned the data. "It's the oxygen filtration system. One of the filters is malfunctioning. It's not filtering out carbon dioxide as it should." The magnitude of the issue became clear within seconds. If they couldn't resolve the issue, the oxygen supply would eventually become toxic. There were backups in place, but if the malfunction spread to other systems, it could be catastrophic. Clara, we need to act fast," Lena said, her voice steady despite the mounting anxiety. Michael immediately dove into the technical side of things, while Clara checked the crew's oxygen levels. They couldn't risk any contamination, so every second counted. The ship's atmosphere was already beginning to shift. Carbon dioxide levels were rising, though still within manageable ranges. Clara double-checked the crew's vitals, ensuring that none of them were showing signs of early hypoxia. It was a delicate balancing act, but they had the tools, the knowledge, and most importantly, the time. For now, minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Lena worked alongside Michael, running diagnostics and checking the backup systems. She could feel the tension mounting with every passing second. The rest of the crew stood by, waiting for a solution, knowing that they had no way to go back. And then, just as the situation was reaching critical levels, Michael found the problem. A small crack in one of the filters, barely visible to the naked eye, had caused the malfunction. Using a combination of spare parts and ingenuity, he rigged a temporary fix, allowing the oxygen filtration system to resume normal operation. Lena sighed in relief. They weren't out of the woods yet, but the worst had been averted. In the weeks that followed, the crew faced additional challenges. Minor malfunctions became routine, but each problem, though seemingly small, reminded them of the fragility of their situation. They had grown accustomed to the isolation, but it still felt suffocating. There were no sunsets to watch, no familiar voices to hear, no bustling city streets to walk through. Just the silence of space and the rhythmic hum of the spacecraft. Despite the ever-present pressure, there were moments of camaraderie that brought the team together. Late-night dinners in the galley were moments of respite, where they laughed, shared stories, and talked about life back on Earth. They discussed what they would do once they arrived on Mars, what the future of humanity would look like. It wasn't just a journey for them. It was a journey for all of mankind. One evening, as they gathered for their daily check-in, Clara asked, "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it? All of this, everything we're doing?" David was the first to respond. "Of course. It's worth it. It has to be. We're not just going to Mars for ourselves. We're going for everyone who's ever dreamed of reaching the stars." Lena nodded, her voice quiet. "Yeah, but sometimes I wonder if we're even ready. Can we really make it? Can we build something sustainable? Can we really live on Mars?" "I think we're ready," Michael said, his tone firm. "We've got the tools, the technology, and the people. We've trained for this. We've got the knowledge to make it happen." Nathan's words echoed in Elon's mind. Even now, Mars isn't the endgame. It's just the beginning. The first step towards humanity becoming a multi-planetary species. And so, they pressed on. Each day brought them closer to Mars. Each challenge made them stronger, more united. And with each passing second, they inched closer to the unknown. The months began to blur together. Each day felt like the last, but there was no end in sight. The Earth had long since disappeared behind them, becoming just a distant memory. The only thing that existed now was the spacecraft and the red planet that waited for them. As the spacecraft systems continued to run smoothly, the crew's energy began to wane. The isolation was starting to take a psychological toll. For some, it was the monotony that was hardest to bear. For others, it was the growing distance from their families. But one thing was clear: everyone was feeling the pressure. Yet, despite it all, there was hope. There had to be. The world was watching. They were no longer just astronauts. They were the pioneers of a new era. And Mars, distant and cold, was just the first frontier. They were not just traveling to another planet. They were traveling to a new future. A future that would require everything they had and everything they were. The journey had been long, but now, after 5 months in space, Mars was finally within reach. The red planet, once just a distant speck in the night sky, now loomed large through the spacecraft's observation windows. Every crew member felt the weight of that moment. This was not just the culmination of their efforts, but the culmination of humanity's dream to reach another world. Inside the spacecraft, there was a strange sense of quiet anticipation. The usual hum of machinery and the routine of daily checks were overshadowed by the dawning realization that they were about to enter Mars' orbit. The vast emptiness of space seemed to press in on them as they neared their destination, but the crew's minds were focused on the challenge ahead. David Larkin, the mission commander, was the first to break the silence. "All right, team. The hardest part is yet to come. We need to be ready for the orbital insertion. The landing on Mars is only half the battle. We've trained for this. Stay sharp." Clara Torres looked out the window, her mind racing. The gravity on Mars is so much weaker than Earth's. The landing will be tricky. I've been reviewing the protocols over and over. We need to be ready for any anomalies. Michael Reed, the engineer, checked the spacecraft systems again. The thrusters are set for orbital entry. Once we get there, it's just a matter of executing the landing sequence. The real test will be when we descend. Atmospheric entry on Mars is nothing like Earth. We can't afford any mistakes. Lena Fox, the systems expert, nodded, her focus entirely on the life support systems. Everything's holding steady here. The backup systems are online, and the crew's health checks are all within parameters. But once we land, we need to be sure the habitat modules are activated and operational immediately. For the next few hours, the crew worked in silence, preparing for the most crucial part of the mission. The spacecraft was designed for deep space travel, but the descent to Mars would test everything, every system, every calculation, every contingency plan. As they approached Mars, the spacecraft had to execute a critical orbital insertion maneuver. The planet's gravity was weaker than Earth's, but it still required a precise sequence of thrusts to enter orbit safely. The window for success was narrow. Too much force, and they could overshoot the planet. Too little, and they risked being trapped in a dangerous orbit. David's hands were steady as he input the final commands into the control panel. Thrusters firing in 3, 2, 1. The spacecraft shuddered as the main engines ignited. The control room fell silent as they felt the force of the maneuver. Michael's eyes flicked between the various readouts, ensuring the thrusters were firing within the correct parameters. Time seemed to slow as the spacecraft passed through the final stage of orbital insertion. If anything went wrong here, it would set them on a disastrous course. The seconds dragged on, but then Michael's voice broke through the tension. "We're in orbit. That's it. We've done it." A collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. The hardest part of the journey was over, but the landing was yet to come. For a brief moment, the crew allowed themselves a quiet sense of accomplishment, but they knew the real challenge had only just begun. As the spacecraft began its descent toward Mars, the tension was palpable. David initiated the sequence for atmospheric entry. The Martian atmosphere, thin and unpredictable, was their next obstacle. They would need to slow down rapidly as they approached the surface, using both the atmospheric drag and their remaining fuel to control their speed. If the spacecraft entered the atmosphere too quickly, they would burn up in the intense heat. Too slow, and they risked missing the landing zone entirely. Lena, monitoring the life support systems, felt the pressure of the moment. Keep the air scrubbers active and make sure the cooling systems stay balanced. If this doesn't work, we won't have the resources to survive the landing. Michael's eyes were fixed on the telemetry data as he adjusted the thrusters. "I've adjusted the trajectory. We're on course. The descent should be smooth." But as the spacecraft began its entry into Mars' atmosphere, something unexpected happened. The heat shield, designed to protect the spacecraft from the intense friction of entry, began to show signs of distress. A warning flashed across Michael's screen. Heat shield integrity at 85%. Warning, potential structural failure in 30 minutes. The room went cold with the realization. The heat shield was beginning to fail, and they were still over 200 miles from the surface. David's voice broke the silence. "Michael, we need to maintain this descent. Can we keep the heat shield intact long enough to land?" Michael didn't hesitate. "We can do this, but we're cutting it close. If the shield gives out before we reach the surface, we'll have to abort the landing, and we won't have another chance for a safe descent. The only option would be to go into orbit and try again." Lena spoke up, her voice steady but urgent. "If we abort the landing, we could lose the entire mission. The life support systems won't last in orbit." "We're committed." David nodded grimly. "We move forward. Trust the systems. We've trained for this. We have to push through." The spacecraft plunged deeper into Mars' atmosphere. The temperature around the ship continued to rise as the friction of entry increased. It felt as if they were descending into an oven, and yet they were still miles away from the surface. Sweat beaded on every crew member's brow, but they remained focused. There was no turning back now. The countdown to the surface was fast approaching. A split second could decide everything. The spacecraft's descent had slowed slightly, but the heat shield's integrity continued to degrade. Michael worked frantically, rerouting power, adjusting fuel levels, and recalculating the descent path in real time. We have less than 15 minutes before we hit the lower atmosphere. This is going to be close. Every second felt like an eternity as the crew held their collective breath. They had no backup plan, no failsafe. This was the only shot they had. Then, just as the heat shield status indicator dipped below 50%, something unexpected happened. The control systems kicked in. A last-minute recalibration allowed the ship to adjust its trajectory ever so slightly, reducing the heat load on the shield. "Guys, we might just make it," Michael said, sounding more confident now. "The system's compensating. The heat shield is holding." It was a moment of pure, overwhelming relief. For a few seconds, the tension eased, and the crew allowed themselves to believe that they were truly going to land on Mars. The spacecraft's descent continued, the ground drawing closer. As they neared the Martian surface, David took over manual control, guiding the craft toward their designated landing site, a flat region near the northern polar ice caps. This would be their base of operations, a perfect spot to set up the first human settlement on Mars. The final moments of descent were excruciating. Every movement of the spacecraft felt exaggerated, every adjustment critical. The planet's red, dusty surface seemed to rush toward them in a terrifyingly beautiful way. "Prepare for landing." David's voice rang out. The entire crew braced themselves, hearts pounding in their chests. The thrusters fired at full power, slowing their descent to a near crawl. Then, with a thud that reverberated through the ship, the spacecraft's landing gear touched down. "We've landed," David whispered, almost in disbelief. For a moment, no one spoke. They just sat there, the reality of their achievement sinking in. They had arrived on Mars. Against all odds, they had succeeded. The crew unstrapped their harnesses and stood, looking out the observation windows at the barren Martian landscape stretching out before them. The red dust, the jagged rocks, and the faint silhouette of the distant horizon were all signs that they had made it, humanity's first successful landing on Mars. David turned to the crew, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the control panel. "We've made history, but now, we begin the real work." The crew stood tall, ready to face the unknown. Together, they would build a new future. The day had come. The crew, still reeling from the shock of their successful landing, began their preparations for the first-ever human steps on the Martian surface. They had trained for this moment for years, but now, with the pressure of reality, the task felt infinitely more daunting. The moment their boots touched the red soil of Mars would be a moment etched into history. David Larkin, as the mission commander, had the honor of being the first to step out of the spacecraft. The air inside the habitat was thick with anticipation as he donned his spacesuit and checked the seals one final time. He looked to his crew, his expression a mixture of pride and determination. "We knew this day would come, but now it's here," David said, his voice crackling over the intercom. "It's not just a victory for us, it's a victory for all of humanity." Clara Torres, Lena Fox, and Michael Reed all nodded, their eyes bright with excitement. They knew the significance of this moment. This was the beginning of something far bigger than any of them. After final checks and calibrations, David pressed the button to open the hatch. The airlock hissed as the doors slowly parted, revealing the Martian landscape in all its stark beauty. The thin atmosphere, the pale orange sky, and the barren horizon seemed to stretch on forever. For a moment, it almost felt unreal, as if they were standing in a dream. David took a deep breath, well, as much as one could in a spacesuit, and placed his first foot on Mars. The dust kicked up beneath his boot as it sank into the soft soil. "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," he said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion that threatened to overtake him. The sound of his words echoed across the empty landscape, carrying with them the weight of 1,000 years of human ambition. His crew followed suit, stepping out of the airlock and onto the Martian soil. Each of them took a moment to absorb the gravity of the situation, knowing that this was only the first of many steps, not just for them, but for the generations to come. Their first priority was to ensure that the habitat modules they had sent ahead were operational. The landing had been smooth, but there was no time to rest. Mars was an unforgiving world, and every moment counted. The crew had worked long hours to ensure that the habitat would be ready for them once they landed. They had no choice but to make sure it was functional immediately. The habitat module was a cylindrical structure designed to house all their life support systems, research labs, and living quarters. It had been built with advanced technology to withstand the extreme conditions of Mars, temperature fluctuations, radiation, and the lack of a breathable atmosphere. It had everything they needed to survive: oxygen, food, water, and shelter. Michael Reed led the charge to power up the systems, his mind constantly shifting from one checklist to the next. Lena, meanwhile, went over the life support systems, ensuring that the oxygen generators and water purification systems were running at full capacity. Clara focused on setting up the medical bay, ensuring the crew's health was monitored closely. As the habitat powered up, the initial tension began to lift. It was clear that they had landed safely, but now they had to prove they could sustain themselves on Mars. But even as the systems came online, a new challenge emerged. The atmospheric readings from the habitat's external sensors showed a slight fluctuation in pressure. At first, Michael dismissed it as a minor glitch, but the numbers continued to rise. "We've got an issue," Michael said, his voice tense as he stared at the screens. "There's a breach in the outer shell of the habitat. It's a small one, but it's enough to be concerning. The pressure's slowly climbing. If we don't fix it, we might have to evacuate the habitat temporarily." David's heart skipped a beat. They had just arrived on Mars, and already they were facing a potential disaster. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice calm but strained. "It's not catastrophic yet," Michael replied, "but we can't afford to ignore it. I'll need a couple of hours to pinpoint the source of the breach and repair it. We have backup systems, but this could become a real problem if it spreads." Clara's voice crackled over the comms. "I've checked the crew's health, and everyone's stable, but the oxygen levels are dropping. If the breach continues, we might start seeing symptoms of oxygen deprivation." David took a deep breath, steeling himself. "We fixed this. We can't afford to let fear take over now. Let's get to work." Michael, Lena, and David worked together, inspecting the habitat's exterior through the observation windows. The breach was located on a lower section of the cylindrical habitat, where the hull had been stressed during descent. Fortunately, the team had planned for this. The crew had carried repair kits with them, along with a special Martian sealant that could patch up most minor breaches. Michael quickly suited up and, with Lena's help, began the repair process. The team worked methodically, ensuring that every step was precise. As Michael sealed the breach, Lena monitored the habitat's pressure systems from inside, ready to activate the emergency valves if necessary. David kept a careful eye on the surrounding Martian landscape, the desolate horizon serving as a constant reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond their fragile shelter. After what felt like hours of meticulous work, Michael finally gave the all-clear. "The breach is sealed. Pressure levels are stabilizing. We've done it." David exhaled, the tension that had built up in his chest finally releasing. "Good job, team. This is what we trained for. We adapt. We fix problems. And we move forward." That night, as the crew gathered for their first meal on Mars, there was a sense of camaraderie. The challenges of the day had bonded them even closer together. But they also understood something important. The mission to Mars wasn't just about landing on the planet. It was about survival, adaptation, and resilience. Every challenge they faced, from the heat shield failure to the habitat breach, had tested their ability to stay calm under pressure, to think critically, and to act decisively. Clara spoke up as she set down her tray. "You know, I've been thinking about something. We've all been trained for the science, for the engineering, for the tech, but we've never really prepared ourselves for the emotional toll. It's one thing to land on Mars, but it's another to live here, alone, in a place where every breath could be your last if something goes wrong." Lena nodded, her voice soft but firm. "We're pioneers, but pioneers don't just go into the unknown. They learn how to live there, and they make mistakes. The trick is not letting those mistakes define you. It's how you learn from them that matters." David looked around the table, his eyes meeting each of their gazes. "She's right. What we've done here, landing on Mars, surviving the first 24 hours, that's just the beginning. We've got an entire planet to explore and make our own. But we've got to be strong, for ourselves and for each other. With the repairs completed and the habitat operational, the crew settled in for their first night on Mars. As they lay in their quarters, the quiet hum of the life support system's the only sound. Each member of the team knew that the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. But they were ready. The next day, the real work would begin. The mission was no longer just about landing on Mars. It was about establishing a permanent presence. They needed to begin the process of building sustainable habitats, testing new technologies, and researching how humans could live and thrive on this foreign world. David knew that their work would serve as the foundation for future missions to Mars, and eventually to other planets. Humanity had taken its first step beyond Earth. Now, it was time to build a future. Tomorrow, David thought as he stared at the Martian sky through the small window of his quarters, we start the real mission, and we'll make it work. The following morning arrived with an eerie stillness. Mars, with its desolate, dusty terrain, seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The pale, yellowish light from the sun barely pierced through the thin Martian atmosphere, casting long shadows across the landscape. The crew of the Phoenix had awoken to their first full day on Mars, and with it, the weight of their mission settled more heavily upon them. David Larkin stood by the window of the habitat, gazing out at the barren landscape. There was a part of him that was still amazed by the sight, the vast, red emptiness that had once been only a dream. But the exhilaration of landing had faded, replaced now by the sobering reality of what lay ahead. The work was only just beginning. We're not here to just look at Mars, he said to himself, before turning to face the rest of the crew. Today, we start building our future. The crew had already started their morning routines, checking systems, verifying oxygen levels, and running diagnostics on the various tools and equipment they would need for the next phase of their mission. As a team, they had prepared for every challenge. But now, facing the unknown on Mars, they would need more than just technical expertise. They would need resilience, creativity, and a willingness to adapt to an environment that was unlike anything they had ever known. Their first task was to begin excavating a site for the first human settlement on Mars. They had a base plan that had been developed back on Earth, but on the ground, the landscape was far more treacherous than they had anticipated. The soil was loose and sandy, and Mars' weak gravity made it more difficult than expected to maneuver heavy equipment. Michael Reed, the engineer, was the first to try out the excavation equipment, a set of robotic drones designed to dig into the Martian soil and create a foundation for their structures. He activated the drones, and they hummed to life, their robotic arms digging into the ground. These drones were designed for Earth, but we've had to make a lot of adjustments for Mars, Michael said as he watched the machines work. The low gravity makes things tricky. The soil shifts differently than we thought it would. Lena Fox, the systems expert, was analyzing the data. The drone sensors are picking up significant amounts of dust, which could clog the filters. We'll need to clear the debris periodically, or the drones won't be able to function efficiently. Clara Torres, the mission's doctor, observed the whole operation from inside the habitat, her mind already calculating the health implications. Keep an eye on the dust. Long-term exposure could lead to respiratory problems. We'll need to make sure everyone has proper filtration in their suits, and we'll also have to monitor for any signs of irritation or damage to the lungs. The team worked in harmony, each of them managing their respective tasks while keeping an eye on the overall operation. But it was clear that progress would not be as swift as they had hoped. The Martian soil was harder than expected, and the dust was a constant issue. What had seemed like a straightforward excavation was turning into a much longer and more complex process. As the day wore on, an unexpected challenge arose. The temperature began to drop rapidly, much faster than anticipated. Mars had a thin atmosphere that did little to retain heat, and while it was still the middle of the day, the temperature inside the habitat began to fluctuate. They had set the internal climate to remain stable, but the rapid changes outside were affecting the cooling systems. Temperatures dropping faster than we thought, Michael said, checking the readings on his tablet. This could cause issues with our equipment if we don't stabilize it soon. Lena immediately sprang into action, running a diagnostic on the cooling systems. The external temperature is nearing -100 degrees Fahrenheit. The systems are compensating, but not quickly enough. We'll have to increase the internal heat output or risk freezing our equipment. David, always calm under pressure, nodded. Keep an eye on the systems. We'll need to create a more reliable thermal insulation solution for the longer term. For now, let's keep everything running smoothly. As the temperature outside continued to plummet, the crew realized they were in uncharted territory. The situation was far more extreme than the simulations had predicted. Mars was unpredictable, and as they were learning, even the smallest details could turn into major challenges. The pressure was beginning to show. The team had worked for hours without rest, pushing through one issue after another. While they were used to pressure, the isolation of Mars was starting to take a toll. Without the support of Earth, without the constant communication and reassurance from home, the crew found themselves confronting not just the physical challenges of living on Mars, but the psychological toll it was taking on them. David noticed it first. Clara had been quieter than usual, her mind preoccupied with something. He caught her standing at the observation window, staring out at the Martian horizon with a faraway look in her eyes. "Clara?" he asked gently, stepping up beside her. "Everything okay?" She didn't look at him immediately, but eventually, her eyes met his. "I'm just thinking. This is a lot more than I expected. It's not just about the mission. It's about survival, day in and day out. It's hard to keep my focus when I feel like we're constantly putting out fires. I know we have to, but it's overwhelming." David nodded, understanding all too well. It's normal to feel this way. Mars doesn't give us any room for error. But we're in this together. We'll get through it, one step at a time. But there was something more beneath her words, something that felt off. Clara wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Lena had been snappier than usual. Michael was growing increasingly frustrated with the slow progress of their work, and even David himself felt the strain. It wasn't just the environment of Mars that was difficult, it was the isolation. The lack of support, the lack of contact with Earth, and the knowledge that they were completely alone, millions of miles from home, had created a subtle undercurrent of tension. By the end of the day, after a tense debriefing where tempers flared briefly, David realized that they needed to address the team's emotional well-being as much as their technical challenges. This wasn't just a scientific mission, it was a human mission. They had to be strong, but they also had to take care of each other. "We've made it this far," David said, his voice steady but firm. "But this is just the beginning. Mars will break us if we let it. We've got to keep each other strong, not just physically but mentally. I know we're all tired and frustrated, but we have to trust in each other and in our mission. Together, we can overcome anything." The crew listened quietly, each of them reflecting on his words. Slowly, they nodded, silently acknowledging that they needed to pull together, not just as co-workers, but as a team. Clara was the first to break the silence. "I'm sorry. I've been feeling the weight of this, and I've been keeping it to myself. I just want to get it right." Lena smiled, a rare warmth in her eyes. "We all want that. We're in this together. Let's focus on the next task and get through it, one step at a time." Michael nodded in agreement. "We'll make it. We always do." The next day, as they resumed their excavation work, the crew worked with a renewed sense of purpose. They communicated more openly, helped each other out more willingly, and faced each challenge as a team. Slowly but surely, they began to make progress. The drones were functioning more smoothly, the cooling systems had stabilized, and their excavation site was taking shape. By the end of the day, they had successfully dug the first section of the foundation for their new habitat, a small victory, but one that felt like a monumental achievement given everything they had faced. David stood back, surveying their progress. "We've taken the first real step toward building a sustainable colony, and we did it together." The crew shared a quiet moment of pride. There was still so much to do, and so many challenges ahead. But for the first time since landing, they truly felt like they were making a difference. They were no longer just surviving. They were beginning to thrive. The Martian landscape seemed to change before their eyes. What had initially appeared to be a monotonous expanse of red soil and rocks began to reveal its true nature. Winds, though lighter than Earth's, were more frequent than expected. These winds, carrying fine dust, had a strange, almost magnetic effect on the equipment. The habitat had been a triumph, But now the elements seemed determined to test their resolve. David Larkin stood by the observation window once again, looking out across the rocky terrain. The swirling dust storms were starting to pick up in frequency, their haze transforming the once clear, barren horizon into something that felt more like a hostile force rather than just a natural phenomenon. "How long until the next storm hits?" he asked, his voice steady, though there was an edge of concern. Lena Fox, who had been monitoring atmospheric conditions, answered quickly. "We've got about 12 hours before the next one hits. The storms come in cycles, but their intensity varies. The last one was only a level 2, but this one could be worse." Michael Reed was standing nearby, examining one of the excavation drones. "These dust storms aren't just annoying, they're dangerous. The dust is abrasive, and it's getting into everything. Our equipment is going to wear out faster than we thought if we don't protect it." Clara Torres, the medical officer, raised a valid concern from her station. "Dust inhalation is a problem too. If these storms get bad enough, even with the suits, we could see respiratory issues. Not just short-term, long-term exposure could cause serious damage. We need to be careful." David took a breath, pushing the rising sense of panic down. "We've trained for this. We knew there would be unexpected elements. We're not giving up." The storm hit sooner than expected. The sky darkened, and the wind began to howl outside the habitat's reinforced walls. Inside, the hum of the life support systems was interrupted only by the occasional beep of equipment being recalibrated or adjusted. The crew worked quickly, sealing any weak points and checking the integrity of the habitat structure. Their immediate goal was to ensure that nothing from the outside could breach the habitat. Mars didn't just throw dust and wind at them. It threw unpredictability, and if they didn't stay ahead of it, they would lose everything. "We need to seal all external openings," Michael instructed. "Double-check the seals on the supply containers. No way we want dust getting inside, especially if it's more than just dust." "Understood," Lena responded, scanning the systems. "We'll need to divert some power to the external vents. If the storm picks up, we'll need backup air filtration immediately." As the storm raged on, the crew could feel the pressure mounting. For hours, they sat in silence, each of them working on their respective tasks, their eyes flicking to the ever-growing storm outside. The dust began to pile up against the habitat's windows, almost obscuring the view. Despite their best efforts, the storm wasn't just a physical challenge, it was psychological too. The isolation, the feeling of being trapped inside a small, confined space millions of miles from Earth, started to gnaw at their nerves. The storm was a constant reminder of just how small and fragile they were in the grand scheme of the universe. Then, something happened that no one was expecting, a signal. It came in the middle of the storm, a brief, almost inaudible hum on the radio frequency. David was the first to hear it, sitting alone at the comm station, reviewing data from the storm's progression. "Did you hear that?" he asked, pausing. The room went silent. The hum came again, louder this time, then cut off. Michael, Lena, and Clara rushed over, confusion spreading across their faces. "It's not from Earth," Lena said, her eyes wide with disbelief. "There's no way this could be a communication from Earth. It's a different frequency." Clara leaned over David's shoulder, her brow furrowed. "What is it? A glitch?" "I don't think so," David replied, his voice tense. "It's too consistent. Something or someone is transmitting on our frequency." The sound was faint but distinct, nothing like any of their usual communications. This was something alien, something foreign to the crew. David's heart raced as his mind raced faster. "Can we trace it?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. They hadn't set up any deep signal tracing equipment. Their resources were limited, and their main objective was survival, not exploration of possible extraterrestrial signals. "It's too weak to pinpoint, but it's definitely there," Lena said, her fingers flying over the comms panel, trying to get a clearer signal. David stared at the screen, unsure of how to proceed. This was the first indication of anything unexpected since they landed. A mystery had just emerged in the middle of their most crucial survival mission, and it could change everything. As the storm continued to batter the habitat, the crew was divided in their reactions. Lena was the most skeptical. "This is more trouble than we need. We've got enough on our plate just keeping the storm at bay and ensuring our equipment holds up. We can't afford to waste time chasing ghosts. Michael was intrigued but wary. I agree. We don't even know what this is. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious. If it's something, anything, coming from Mars, it could be a game changer. But Clara, ever the optimist, had a different view. What if this is a sign, a signal from something or someone? Maybe we're not alone here. Maybe this is the breakthrough we need. A new chapter in human history. David, as always, remained calm. Let's not jump to conclusions. We need to stay focused on the task at hand. Right now, our primary mission is survival. But we'll investigate further once the storm clears. The storm raged for days, cutting them off from the outside world. With their systems running at full capacity, the crew had no choice but to wait it out, unsure of when it would pass. Time seemed to stretch on, each hour feeling like a lifetime. The storm served as a constant reminder of the volatility of life on Mars, an unpredictable force that could erase everything in an instant. During the storm, David spent his nights in the comms room, trying to decipher the strange signal. The hum would come and go, but each time, it became more distinct. The crew continued with their daily routines, but the mystery of the signal loomed over everything, creating an invisible tension. Clara had become increasingly obsessed with the idea that the signal could be a message from extraterrestrial life. She spent hours analyzing the frequency patterns, even as the rest of the crew tried to maintain focus on their primary mission. Lena, however, remained skeptical. We need to stop wasting time on this. The storm is bad enough, and we've got 100 other things to deal with. Who knows what this signal is? It could just be interference from the storm itself. But David, torn between the practical and the curious, couldn't help but wonder. What if it wasn't just interference? What if they were on the verge of something monumental? There was only one way to find out, and that meant pushing forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the storm began to subside. The winds died down, the dust settled, and the Martian sky returned to its familiar orange hue. The crew wasted no time in resuming their tasks, but the atmosphere had shifted. The mystery of the signal was no longer something they could ignore. It was something they would have to confront. David made the decision to investigate the signal further, even though the risks were high. We've come this far. We're going to finish what we started. If this is a signal, if it's something real, we have to know. With their systems finally stabilized, the crew set to work, trying to trace the source of the mysterious signal. But as they worked, one thing became painfully clear. The answers they sought might not come easily. The Red Planet had just thrown its most dangerous riddle at them, and it wasn't going to be solved overnight. The storm had subsided, but the calm was only temporary. The crew of the Phoenix had barely begun to breathe a sigh of relief before the strange signal returned. The low hum, now a constant presence in the background, was becoming impossible to ignore. David Larkin sat at the comm station once again, his eyes glued to the screen as the faint yet persistent sound echoed through the speakers. He had been up all night trying to trace its origin, but the task was proving far more complicated than anticipated. "David, we need to talk," Lena Fox said, her voice cutting through his concentration. She stood in the doorway of the comms room, her expression serious. David looked up from the screen, his tired eyes betraying the hours he'd spent searching for answers. "I know," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't ignore this. We have to find out what it is." Lena crossed the threshold and sat down across from him. "I get it, but we need to be realistic. We've got a storm's worth of damage to assess, systems to stabilize, and excavation plans to review. If we keep chasing this signal, we might be neglecting the mission." David took a deep breath, trying to balance the growing tension in the room. "I understand the priority, Lena, but this could be a breakthrough. If this is some sort of communication, anything, we can't afford to miss it. We don't know what's out there." Lena hesitated, looking at the screen where the signal flickered in the background. "I'll support you, David, but if we do this, we need a clear plan. We can't afford another distraction." David nodded. "We'll do both. Keep the mission going while we investigate. I'll keep it contained, just a small team for now." The following day, David gathered the crew in the central hub of the habitat. Despite the lingering tension from the storm, there was an underlying sense of purpose. The possibility of an extraterrestrial signal was too compelling to ignore. But David knew that this was no time for wild speculation. The mission still had to be their primary focus. "We've got a situation," David began, his tone firm but calm. "The signal is back, and it's stronger than before. We're going to trace it, but we're going to do it carefully. Lena, Michael, I need you to focus on the systems. Clara, I'm going to need your help with health and safety protocols. This is going to take all of us." Clara looked up from her station, concern in her eyes. "Are we really going to chase this down, David? We don't know what we're dealing with. It could be dangerous." David met her gaze. "We're going to do this carefully, Clara. We'll stick to our primary objectives and move cautiously. But we need to know what it is. If it's something real, we have to be prepared for whatever comes next." The crew agreed, albeit reluctantly. There was no question that they were all curious, too curious to ignore it. And so, they set about their new task. The priority was clear: locate the source of the signal, analyze it, and report back to Earth, if possible. The first step was narrowing down the location. David and Lena worked side by side, cross-checking the signal's frequency with known Martian data. The signal was unlike anything they'd seen before. It didn't match any of the frequencies Earth had used to communicate with Mars. It wasn't interference from their equipment or a malfunction of the comm systems. No, this was something intentional. "It's not from Earth," Lena confirmed after hours of calculations. "And it's not from the surface. It's coming from somewhere beneath us." Michael, ever the engineer, frowned as he reviewed the data. "Under us? That's weird. The terrain here isn't exactly conducive to anything hidden. There's no sign of artificial structures within 100 kilometers. Whatever this is, it's deep." David stared at the display, his mind racing. A base? An underground facility? Could Mars have been visited long before us? Lena shook her head. "The data doesn't match any known structures. If something's down there, it's not conventional. And it's not natural either." The uncertainty was palpable. They had no choice but to investigate. But they needed more than just an analysis. They needed to get closer. So, they made the decision to send a team to the site where the signal seemed strongest. David, Lena, and Michael were selected for the reconnaissance mission. They gathered their gear, suits, oxygen tanks, and survival kits, and set off towards the location that the signal appeared to be emanating from. The atmosphere inside the habitat was tense as the trio climbed into the rover and began their journey across the Martian landscape. The journey itself was grueling. Despite the relative calm after the storm, the terrain remained unpredictable. The loose dust and uneven rocks made the ride bumpy, and they had to maneuver carefully. Mars had a way of shifting its face. What had been a clear path one day could turn into an obstacle the next. As they approached the designated location, something strange caught Michael's attention. A large, seemingly man-made anomaly lay ahead, a deep crater-like structure that hadn't appeared on any of the previous maps they'd studied. "That wasn't there before," Michael muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. David squinted at the formation. "It's not a crater. That shape looks deliberate." The rover slowed as they approached, the wheels crunching against the Martian dust. The site seemed to pulsate with an energy they couldn't identify, a low hum that mirrored the signal they'd been tracking. Lena checked the coordinates again. "This is it. The signal is coming from somewhere near this location." The crew disembarked from the rover and made their way toward the strange formation. As they neared the anomaly, the hum of the signal grew louder, vibrating through their suits. It was unnerving, like a voice trying to speak, but unable to form words. Suddenly, Michael froze. He pointed toward the ground, where a series of unnatural markings appeared in the dust. Deep grooves that seemed to lead into the earth, as though something had been buried long ago, and perhaps disturbed recently. "Look at this," Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. "This doesn't look natural. It's almost like something was dug up here." David kneeled down to examine the markings, his heart racing. He could feel the pull of something significant just beneath the surface. They needed to dig, to investigate further, but the crew had no tools capable of this level of excavation. They had only the basic instruments with them. "We need to go deeper," David said, his voice steady but urgent. "If there's something buried here, we have to find out what it is." Lena looked around nervously, her eyes scanning the barren landscape. "If there's something down there, it's not just a coincidence. We're not the first to find this." The signal was louder now, vibrating in their bones, as if urging them to uncover the truth. But the risks were mounting. The crew had no way of knowing what they were about to unearth, and whether it was something that could help them, or something far more dangerous. David stood for a moment, looking at his crew. He could see the doubt in their eyes, but also the fire of curiosity. They all knew what this meant, the discovery of a lifetime. But the risks were immense. Was it worth it? "Do we go on?" David asked, breaking the silence. Lena didn't hesitate. "We've come this far. We can't back down now." Michael nodded, his face grim. "Agreed. Whatever's buried here could change everything. We need to find out what's beneath us." The decision was made. They would dig. As they prepared to dig into the Martian soil, the hum of the signal grew louder, almost as if it was alive. Something hidden in the depths of Mars was calling to them, and they couldn't turn back now. The dust settled as David, Lena, and Michael set up the excavation tools by the strange Martian anomaly. The air was still, but tension hung heavy between them. With the rover standing a few meters away, they were ready to start digging into the Martian soil. But the sense of mystery, and perhaps danger, hovered over them. No one had expected to find anything like this on Mars. Lena stood by the rover's equipment, analyzing their options. "We have the basic tools we brought for minor geological analysis. Nothing heavy-duty, but it should suffice for now. We'll dig carefully. We don't know what's under the surface." David nodded. His mind raced as he looked at the grooves in the Martian soil. The markings seemed deliberate, as if something, had purposefully altered the landscape here. The pulsating hum, which had grown steadily louder as they neared the site, only added to the feeling of unease. "Let's keep it slow," David said, focusing on the task ahead. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Michael, who had already begun calibrating one of the drills, glanced up. "We've got no other choice but to find out. If this thing is buried beneath us, we need to know exactly what it is and how deep it goes." Lena, ever the realist, scanned the horizon. "I don't know why, but I feel like we're opening a door to something we can't close again. Mars might have been silent for eons, but whatever we find here, it could change everything." David turned toward her. "We're not backing down now. We've made it this far. The question is, what are we digging up? And what happens when we do?" The hum grew louder as they began to drill into the soil. Every layer they peeled away brought them closer to whatever lay beneath. After several hours of careful digging, the drill bit struck something solid, something metal. The sound was unmistakable, a sharp, resonant clink. "Got something," Michael said, his voice tinged with excitement. He motioned for David and Lena to approach. "It's not just soil. There's something down there. We need to get it out." They moved to the side as Michael carefully manipulated the drill, widening the hole around the metal object. The texture of the metal was unlike anything they had expected, smooth and slightly reflective, as though it had been preserved for millennia. David's heart raced. "What is this thing?" Lena squinted at the object, trying to make sense of it. "It looks like metal, but it's not something we've ever seen before. This doesn't fit any known materials used by Earth's space agencies. This is something else." They continued to dig, removing the loose dirt and rock around the object. The strange metal began to reveal more of its form. A large, rectangular panel, almost perfectly shaped and surprisingly smooth, considering how long it had been buried. "Should we pull it out?" Michael asked, eyeing the object carefully. David took a step back, his mind racing. "We don't know if it's safe. We should assess the situation first. We don't know what we're dealing with. It could be dangerous." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous? We're on Mars, David. There's nothing here that could hurt us. This could be our moment. We've been waiting for a discovery like this since we landed." Despite his own curiosity, David held his ground. "We're not taking any chances. We'll be careful." After several more hours of delicate excavation, they had uncovered a larger portion of the object, enough to see that it wasn't just a simple metal sheet. It was a door, of sorts, embedded deep within the Martian soil. There were symbols etched into the surface, strange, angular patterns that seemed to shift as the light hit them at different angles. These symbols, they look like a language, Lena said, stepping forward. But it's not any script I've ever seen. David bent closer, trying to make sense of the markings. Could this be an alien artifact? A structure left behind by someone, or something, long before we ever got here? The hum of the signal grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. It was as if the object was responding to their presence, calling them forward. Michael reached out, cautiously touching the surface of the metal. The moment his hand made contact, the ground around them trembled, faintly at first but growing stronger with each second. The signal pulsed, as if in response to the touch. Then, with a low groan, the metal door shifted. Slowly, it began to open. David stepped back instinctively, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Lena and Michael followed suit, their eyes wide with disbelief. The door opened with a soft hiss, revealing an interior that was illuminated by an eerie, otherworldly glow. Inside, the crew saw something they hadn't expected. A chamber, sealed for centuries, filled with strange, ancient technology. Pipes, conduits, and unknown machinery were scattered throughout the room, some glowing faintly, others silent and dormant. At the far end, a large crystalline object sat suspended in midair, surrounded by a complex network of wires and energy fields. For a moment, no one spoke. The discovery was beyond anything they had imagined. This is it, Michael breathed. This is the discovery we've been waiting for. David took a deep breath, his mind spinning. We don't know what we're dealing with. This could be dangerous. Lena didn't look at him. She was already stepping inside the chamber, her eyes wide with awe. It's not dangerous. It's just old. A relic of a civilization long gone. We're standing in the middle of a lost world, David. Do you understand what this means? David hesitated. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like they were intruding on a mystery that had been forgotten for a reason. But the lure of discovery, the desire to understand, to know what lay hidden beneath Mars for so long, was too great to ignore. He followed Lena into the chamber, with Michael close behind. As they approached the crystalline object, a low hum began to vibrate through the air, matching the signal they had been tracking. The sound became louder and more intense, almost as if the chamber itself was alive, reacting to their presence. Lena reached out, her fingers brushing against the crystalline surface. The moment she made contact, the hum peaked, and suddenly, the chamber was flooded with light. The walls around them shimmered as holographic images began to appear. Images of stars, planets, and strange figures. The images cycled rapidly, revealing what appeared to be the history of Mars itself, or perhaps the history of the beings that had once inhabited it. David watched, his heart pounding in his chest. The images were unlike anything he had ever seen. Strange alien forms, walking through lush, vibrant landscapes, living in cities unlike anything Earth had ever imagined. And then, the final image appeared. A massive, catastrophic event, a destructive force that wiped out the civilization. The images ended abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Lena stood frozen, her hands still on the crystal. This is their story. They came to Mars, they built something here, and then something happened. A disaster. It wiped them out. David's voice was barely a whisper. Who were they? What was that destruction? Michael, too, was speechless. We've just uncovered the final chapter of a civilization's history. But what does it mean for us? And what happens now? The hum continued to pulse around them, as if urging them to understand the gravity of what they had discovered. This was no ordinary relic. It was a warning, a message from the past, and perhaps the key to understanding the fate of an ancient Martian civilization. David's thoughts raced. We've uncovered something monumental, but we need to be careful. We don't know what this technology can do, if anything. We need to bring this back to the habitat, analyze it further, and report to Earth. But as they turned to leave the chamber, the ground beneath them shook again, more violently this time. The signal flared one final time, louder than ever. Whatever this relic was, it wasn't done with them yet. The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just a faint vibration. It was stronger, more persistent, like the beating of a heart beneath Mars itself. The crew froze, their eyes darting toward the crystalline structure, which now pulsed in sync with the shaking. The humming sound they had been hearing intensified, a low, menacing growl that seemed to resonate from deep within the planet. David took a cautious step back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. What's happening? Is the system malfunctioning? Lena, still standing near the crystal, was mesmerized by the changing lights. The holographic images of the Martian civilization had stopped, but the crystal itself seemed to be reacting, glowing brighter with every pulse. "We need to get out of here," Michael said, his voice tight with urgency. "Whatever's going on, we've triggered something. This could be a containment system activating, or something worse." But Lena shook her head, her eyes still locked on the crystal. "No, this is different. The signal, it's not just a warning. It's alive. It's trying to communicate." David's gut twisted with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He had always known that Mars held secrets, but the reality of what they were uncovering was far beyond anything he had imagined. This was no simple relic. This was a living, breathing remnant of a civilization that had once thrived on Mars, and now it was waking up. As the hum grew louder, the images around the room flickered again, this time with more clarity. The holograms seemed to shift and reshape themselves, projecting scenes of the Martian cities before their fall. The figures, tall and slender, moved across landscapes covered in green and blue. The buildings were sleek, organic in design, almost as if they had grown from the planet itself. Then, the images changed. The calm scenes shattered, replaced with chaos. Dark clouds filled the sky, and the ground cracked open in fiery explosions. The figures of the Martian civilization scattered, fleeing in panic. A massive storm, the likes of which the crew had never seen, engulfed everything, tearing apart the cities and swallowing the planet in darkness. The final image was of a colossal, glowing structure at the center of the devastation, pulsating with energy before it was consumed by the cataclysm. "Do you see it?" Lena whispered. This is the end of their world. It wasn't just a natural disaster. It was something they unleashed, something that destroyed them all. David's heart pounded in his chest. And now we've triggered it again. Whatever that disaster was, it's still here. It's still active. Michael stepped back from the crystal, suddenly cautious. "So what do we do? We've disturbed something ancient. If the signal's coming from this, whatever this is, it might be far more than we can handle." Before anyone could respond, a loud crack echoed through the chamber, and the ground beneath them shook again, this time more violently. The walls around them began to creak, and the holographic images flickered and warped as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The light from the crystal blazed brighter, nearly blinding them. The pulsing hum reached a deafening crescendo, as if the signal itself was trying to send a message, louder, faster, more urgently. The crew covered their ears, but it did little to drown out the sound. Then, without warning, the entire chamber began to shift. The walls began to move, rearranging themselves as though they were alive. David stumbled back in shock. "What the hell?" Lena's eyes widened in realization. "It's activating. The structure. It's coming to life." A sudden burst of energy shot through the chamber, and with it came a powerful blast of light. The floor beneath their feet cracked open, revealing a massive underground passage leading even deeper into the Martian crust. "We need to leave. Now," Michael shouted, but Lena didn't move. She was still transfixed by the crystal, which seemed to be calling to her, its light glowing like a beacon. The signal's frequency had changed again, almost like a rhythmic pattern, pulling her closer. "Lena!" David shouted, grabbing her arm. "We have to go now." She snapped out of her trance, but her face was pale, as if she had seen something that had unsettled her to the core. "This isn't just a signal. It's a distress call." This structure, it's not just a remnant of their civilization. It's alive. It's reacting to us. Whatever they unleashed, it's still active. And it's calling for help. David's mind raced. A distress call? But from who? Who is it calling to? Before she could respond, the sound of crunching metal echoed through the chamber. The walls of the room were beginning to close in, sealing the entryway. A thick, metallic substance began to pour down from the ceiling, forming into sleek, organic shapes, like tentacles or limbs, moving as if guided by some unseen intelligence. David instinctively pulled Lena toward the exit. We have to move now. The crew rushed toward the chamber's entrance, but the walls were closing fast. The ground shook violently again, sending them off balance. David glanced back, horrified to see that the crystal had now emitted a violent shockwave of energy, destabilizing the chamber even further. The walls and ceiling were morphing, transforming into something completely unrecognizable. Get to the rover, Michael shouted, already moving toward the exit. They sprinted through the passageway, the sound of metal scraping against metal ringing in their ears. Behind them, the transformation continued, the structure growing more chaotic by the second. The walls themselves seemed to be alive, reacting to their presence. Lena stumbled, but David caught her. We're almost there. Just a little farther. As they neared the rover, the ground beneath them split open, sending a large chunk of debris tumbling toward them. Michael jumped, narrowly avoiding the falling rocks, but David wasn't so lucky. One of the rocks grazed his leg, sending him crashing to the ground. Lena! Michael! Go! David shouted, his voice strained with pain. I'll catch up. But Lena hesitated, panic in her eyes. No, David. We can't leave you. David gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand. Go. I'll be fine. Just get to the rover and get out of here. Lena hesitated, then nodded, her face a mask of determination. We'll wait for you. As they scrambled into the rover, David pushed through the pain, limping toward them. The chamber was collapsing now, and the structure was becoming increasingly unstable. He could hear the ominous hum of the signal growing louder in his ears as he reached the rover. Go, he shouted. Without another word, Lena floored the accelerator, and the rover sped away, leaving the chaos behind. As the crew sped across the Martian surface, they glanced nervously behind them. The anomaly was still visible in the distance, but the structure itself was beginning to disappear, fading into the landscape as though it had never existed. The ground had settled, but the hum of the signal still reverberated in their minds. What the hell just happened? Michael asked, his voice shaky. That thing, what was it? David wiped the blood from his leg, his face pale. I don't know, but we triggered something dangerous. It wasn't just a structure. It was a warning system, and whatever was inside, it wasn't just a distress signal. It was calling for help. Lena's eyes were distant, her mind racing with the implications of what they had uncovered. That disaster, the one we saw in the holograms, it wasn't just the end of their civilization. It was the result of something they did, something they unleashed, and now, it's awake again. And it's still out there. David met her gaze. We've only scratched the surface. Whatever we've just uncovered, it's far bigger than anything we could have imagined. And now, it's reaching out to us. We need to figure out what it means before it's too late. The rover's engines hummed as they sped away from the site, but the crew knew one thing for certain. Their discovery had only just begun, and with it, a new and terrifying chapter had been written in the story of Mars. The rover sped across the barren Martian landscape. The cold, red terrain stretched out before them like an unbroken sea of dust. But despite the seemingly tranquil scene, the crew's minds were reeling from what they had just uncovered. David, Lena, and Michael exchanged uneasy glances as they tried to process the events that had unfolded beneath the surface of Mars. The structure, the glowing crystal, and the ominous signal. It was all too much. It felt as though they had stumbled into a forgotten chapter of Martian history, one that had been buried for a reason. David's leg throbbed with pain, but he gritted his teeth and ignored it, focusing instead on the more pressing concern. We need to report this back to Earth. Whatever we just discovered, It's too dangerous to keep to ourselves. Lena nodded, but there was an unsettling look in her eyes. I agree. But what exactly are we going to tell them? How do we even explain what we saw? They won't believe us. Michael, who was driving the rover, kept his eyes on the horizon, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Does it matter? The signal is still out there. Whatever happened to them, whoever they were, could still be happening now. And it's calling to us. David winced. We can't just ignore it. But we have to be careful. If we go back to base and tell them everything, we might be putting ourselves and Earth at risk. For a long moment, there was silence in the rover as the weight of their discovery settled in. Mars, it seemed, was not just a barren wasteland. It was a place where something ancient and unknown had once thrived. And whatever that something was, it was now awakening. Lena's voice broke the silence. Do you think they're still watching us? The ones who built that structure? David's stomach turned at the thought. I don't know, but it felt like we were being observed. Like they knew we were coming. Michael's grip tightened on the rover's controls. The signal, the crystal. I think it was more than just a distress call. It was a beacon, a way of alerting someone, or something that we were here. Lena stared out the window, her thoughts racing. Maybe that's it. Maybe we were meant to find it. Maybe we're not the first ones to uncover this. David's mind raced. No, that's exactly it. We weren't just uncovering the past. We were tapping into something alive, something still out there, watching, waiting, and it wants us to understand, maybe even help. The rover approached the base camp, a small cluster of structures nestled against the foothills of a Martian mountain range. The lights were dim, and the station looked eerily quiet as they pulled up. David's heart thudded in his chest. They had just uncovered something that could change everything, but now they were returning to an outpost that might not be equipped to handle the implications. Lena turned to David as they got out of the rover. What now? What do we tell the others? The whole crew doesn't even know about the discovery yet. David exhaled sharply. We tell them what we found. We have to, but we have to be careful. If the signal is still active, there's no telling what kind of attention we might be attracting. Just as they entered the base, a sharp, crackling voice came through the communication system. David? Lena? Michael? Where the hell have you been? We've been trying to contact you for hours. It was the station's commander, Sarah Donovan. Her voice was strained, and something in her tone sent a shiver down David's spine. He exchanged a glance with Lena. We were delayed, David said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through him. We found something. Something big. Big? What do you mean by that? Sarah's voice was now tinged with suspicion. What kind of something are we talking about? We'll explain everything once we're inside, David replied. But we need to secure the base and prepare for a potential risk. There was a long pause before Sarah responded. Roger that. I'll meet you in the control room. And David, be careful. I've been getting strange readings from the communication systems. Something's wrong out there. We've lost contact with Earth. David's blood ran cold. What do you mean, lost contact? I don't know, Sarah said, her voice tight. But the comms are down. We haven't been able to reach Earth for hours. And I'm getting interference from the same direction as your signal. Something's blocking us. David exchanged a quick, worried glance with Lena and Michael. We'll be there soon. Stay put. The moment they entered the control room, Sarah stood up from her seat, her face drawn and pale. Her usual confidence was replaced with a deep, unsettling concern. You're not going to believe this, she said, stepping aside to reveal the monitors. Look at the readings. We're not just dealing with a signal. There's something out there, something alive. It's like it's tracking us. David's heart sank. What do you mean, tracking us? Sarah pointed at the screen. It showed a series of data points, flashes of light, massive energy surges, and fluctuating signals all originating from the same direction. The site where they had uncovered the relic. It's been happening since you left, Sarah said. The energy spikes, the interference. It's like someone, or something, is watching us. And it's getting stronger by the minute. Michael's face turned pale. Could it be them? Could it be whatever was in that structure? Lena stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the monitor. It has to be. The signal, the crystal, everything we saw. It wasn't just a message. It was a call. A summons. David clenched his fists, his mind spinning. If it's still out there, we're in serious danger. Whatever was on that planet, it's waking up. It's trying to reach us, and it's trying to do it now. Sarah's voice was steady but laced with fear. And that's not all. We've been picking up strange readings from the surface, patterns we can't explain. It's almost like there's movement beneath the ground. Like something is alive down there, moving closer. David's stomach twisted. We have to find out what it is. And we need to figure out how to stop it before it reaches us. The sound of a distant rumble echoed through the control room, and for a moment, everyone fell silent. The ground shook slightly, just enough to feel the tension in the air. Outside the windows, the Martian landscape looked as desolate as ever. But David knew that something was changing. Should we go back out there? Michael asked, his voice almost a whisper. If it's moving closer, we might need to face it head-on. David shook his head, but there was no certainty in his voice. I don't know. Whatever's down there, it's more than just ancient technology. It's a warning. And if it's trying to reach us now, then it's too late to turn back. Lena stared at the screen, her face pale. We can't just sit here and wait. We need to understand what we've uncovered. We need to know what's out there. David turned to Sarah. How long do we have before it gets here? What's our window? Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the screen, her face grim. Hours, maybe less. The energy readings are escalating rapidly. If something's coming, it'll be here soon. David's mind raced. He had always known that Mars held mysteries, but he never imagined that it could hold a threat like this, a force that had been buried for centuries, waiting to wake up. And now, it was coming for them. We need to find a way to stop it. Whatever it is, David said, his voice resolute. We can't let it reach Earth. Not like this. As the crew gathered around, the hum of the signal grew louder in the background, a constant reminder that they weren't alone. Something was watching. Something was coming. And they didn't have much time left. The hum of the mysterious signal echoed louder than ever through the control room. The crew sat tense, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. Outside, the Martian landscape remained still, as barren and desolate as it had been since their arrival. But David knew that things had changed. Something ancient was stirring beneath their feet, and it was only a matter of time before it reached them. Sarah, David's voice cut through the stillness. Are the communication systems still down? Sarah, her hands hovering over the control panel, nodded grimly. Yes, and the interference is getting worse. Whatever it is down there, it's blocking all communications, both with Earth and with the rover. It's as if it doesn't want us to reach anyone. Michael, standing near the back of the room, clenched his fists. That's what I was afraid of. We're being isolated. If something's down there, if it's coming for us, we're on our own. Lena turned from the window, her face pale but determined. We don't know what it is, or who is behind it. But the signal, it's not just an alarm. It's a warning. David took a step forward. Then we need to figure out what it's trying to tell us. Whatever this thing is, it's not just reacting to us. It's been waiting. The lights in the control room flickered briefly, then steadied. The low rumble they had felt earlier was growing more constant, and now they could feel it in their bones. Whatever was beneath the surface of Mars was moving closer, and it was coming fast. The entire station shook as if a massive force was moving under the ground. The crew scrambled to steady themselves. The rumble was now unmistakable, and the whole station seemed to groan in protest. Then, the wall monitors exploded with chaotic static, their displays glitching and distorting as if the atmosphere was being torn apart. Get away from the monitors, Sarah shouted. This is it. We need to move now. David grabbed Lena's arm as she stumbled. We need to leave the base now, he urged. If whatever is coming is as powerful as we think, staying here is suicide. Michael's eyes were wide with panic. We can't just run. We need answers. We have to know why this is happening. David's expression darkened. We might not have a choice. Whatever is down there is waking up. And from what we've seen, it doesn't care about us. Outside, the sky had darkened, as if a storm was rolling in. Though Mars didn't typically have weather like this. The wind picked up, swirling the red dust into tornado-like formations, blotting out the sun. It was an ominous sign, the calm before a storm that would swallow everything in its path. Lena grabbed her helmet and headed toward the exit. We need to go to the site. We need to understand what's causing this. It's the only way we'll survive. David paused, his mind racing. Could they really face the unknown forces buried on Mars? The same forces that had led to the collapse of an entire civilization? Or was it already too late to stop what they had set in motion? As they suited up and prepared to leave the base, David couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they had been part of something far bigger than they realized. The holographic images, the crystal's pulse, the energy surges, they weren't just signs of a lost civilization. They were clues to an ancient disaster, a disaster that had been hidden for a reason. And now, they had awakened something that was never meant to be disturbed. The group made their way to the rover, the wind howling around them as the dust storm intensified. It was almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, but they couldn't afford to wait. They had to get back to the site and learn what the signal meant. "Stay close, everyone," David said over the comms as they set off. "We don't know what we're walking into, but we need to find out before it's too late." The rover bumped and jolted as it sped across the rocky terrain, the red dust swirling violently in the storm. In the distance, the outline of the ancient structure was barely visible, but David could feel the pull of it, the same way Lena had felt it earlier. It was calling to them, drawing them back, as if it knew they were coming. As they neared the site, the storm intensified, the winds battering the rover from all sides. The glowing crystal they had uncovered earlier was now more than a beacon. It was a storm itself, alive with energy. The signal they had detected was now a tangible presence, vibrating the very air around them. "We're close," Lena said, her voice tense. "I can feel it. The signal, it's alive." The rover skidded to a stop just outside the site, where the ground had split open, revealing the massive structure below. But it was no longer the calm, dormant place they had explored earlier. Now, it was a site of raw power. Pulsing energy radiated from the ground, and the walls seemed to shimmer as if they were breathing. "Get out now," David shouted. "We need to get inside before this whole place collapses." They rushed toward the opening, but the ground trembled beneath their feet. The entire site was shifting, the once stable structure now warping and groaning as though something was emerging from within. Suddenly, the ground split wide open with a deafening crack. From deep within the earth, something huge began to rise. A massive, ancient machine, its surface covered in strange alien markings. It was like a giant exoskeleton, covered in scars and dents from ages of disuse. But it was awakening, reactivating in response to their presence. Lena gasped. This is it. This is what they left behind." David's eyes widened as the massive machine towered over them, its red-hued surface glowing ominously. "What is it? What did they build?" Before Lena could answer, the machine's chest cavity opened, revealing a bright, pulsating core. It was like a massive reactor, glowing with a raw, primal energy that filled the entire landscape with an eerie, pulsating light. And then, just as suddenly as the storm had begun, everything went quiet. From the center of the glowing machine, a voice, deep, resonant, and chilling, broke through the silence. It was not human, nor Martian. It was something ancient, a presence beyond comprehension. "You have awakened us," the voice boomed. "And now, the reckoning begins." David and the crew stood frozen in place, as the realization hit them all at once. The force they had uncovered wasn't just an ancient relic. It was a weapon, a doomsday device designed to protect Mars from an even greater threat. And now, that threat was back. "What is it?" Michael shouted, his voice shaking. "What do you want from us?" The voice echoed again, more insistent this time. "We were the guardians of this world, the Watchers, and we failed. But now, you have awakened what was buried, and the cycle will repeat." Lena's voice trembled. "What do you mean? What's going to happen?" The glowing core began to pulse with a deafening frequency, and the ground beneath them began to rumble violently. The walls of the ancient structure cracked, as though something was trying to escape. "You cannot stop it," the voice said. "The reckoning has already begun." David's stomach turned. What did the Martians do? What happened to them? The voice hesitated before answering, as if considering how much to reveal. "They unleashed the force they could not control. And now, you will face the same fate." Suddenly, the ground cracked open around them, and the earth began to tremble uncontrollably. The massive exoskeleton-like machine emitted a blinding flash of light. The crew braced themselves for what was to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?